What's up, everybody? This is Chris from the podcast Real Film Reviewed, and you're listening to Marv on Pods Like Us.
Hello and welcome to Pods Like Us. I'm Martin Cabell, known to my friends as Marv, and this time I am speaking with returning guest from the show that we're looking at this time at Life and Life Only, Mr. Antony Rotunno. How are you, Antony?
I'm doing very well, mate. Thanks for having me back on the show.
That's cool.
Looking forward to this.
For anybody listening, Antony was on previously on episode 7 of season 1 talking about Glass Onion on John Lennon, which is a really good John Lennon-based podcast, if you'd have not guessed from the title.
And sort of general Beatles sometimes as well, because it's tough to keep it going just talking about one person for 3 years. So.
Yeah. Although saying that, there's so many things about him that you can go into, but yeah, we're not going down that one. We're not talking about that show.
Yeah, we've already talked about it, haven't we, before?
Yeah.
for about 20 minutes just now. But
before people can hear, we were chatting about that.
Yeah, and my friend, David Wills, don't you, Ghosty?
Yes,
he's been on my various shows a few times, and he said Life and Life Only and Glass Onion on John Lennon are more or less the same topics, except that in the John Lennon case, we use John Lennon as a launch point. So that was an I think he was sort of half joking, but not really joking. So that was an interesting observation that I used John Lennon as a base to branch off into other stuff, and now I've kind of expanded it with this podcast. So
yeah, but just to go off on a tangent very quickly, though, it's easy to see how you can do that with John Lennon, though, because his psyche was very special. I don't know how to he had his own way about him that sort of lends itself to that discussion.
Yeah, just very multifaceted. I mean, there's a reason why millions of people have connected with him, as they probably have with Paul and Dylan and other people. But the debate I've had on, again, I'm talking about Glass Onion, but the debate I've had on that is how much of it is because he hasn't been here for 40 years and how much of it is him. And that's an interesting debate, but clearly is multifaceted. I mean, Dick Cavett said, people ask me, what was John Lennon like? What was Muhammad Ali like? And he said, they're impossible to describe because they have this strange aura of, an aura of celebrity, but also an aura of just being a rather unique individual. I put Muhammad Ali in that category, Marlon Brando, people like that.
Yeah. I think because they have that sort of manner about them, a lot of them by the things that have happened to them in their own lives. So people like John and Muhammad Ali and Marlon Brando will let those, shall we say, go, well, these things that have happened to them, their problems, they would let the way that affects them come to the fore. They would just let that out and be natural with that. Whereas someone like McCartney, who has that in his background with his mother's death and this, that, and the other, he'll be a bit more guarded and maybe more protective of that and have almost a sheen showing on the outside as opposed to letting it all just come out.
Well, I think not only Paul, I'd say that's most people You know, if you watch any talk shows, I mean, I think talk shows have really gone downhill, especially now we can watch, you know, Dick Cavett and Parkinson from the 70s and stuff. It was just so much more open in those days. But even then, you know, most people are just, I mean, it's kind of a theme of Life and Life Only, really. It's difficult to offer alternative views because most people either A, don't know what you're talking about, B, don't want to know, or C, you know, they wouldn't talk about it themselves. So we latch onto in a good way, we latch onto these people who just say stuff that the average person might want to say, but they're too scared to, or they feel uncomfortable with. You know, so they do become a kind of weird spokesman. You know, you can live vicariously because you're thinking, oh, John Lennon would say stuff that I'm thinking, but he says it, you know.
Yeah. He doesn't care about saying those things that we think about saying but wouldn't dare say. He just said it, and damn the consequences, shall we say.
Yeah, I mean, I think he knew what he was doing. There's this sort of revisionist Beatles history is John Lennon was a great PR guy as well, and I totally agree with that. He kind of knew what he was doing. But again, just one final thing about this. Have you ever seen the film Last Tango in Paris? Brando in it.
I've seen bits of it. I've not seen the whole film.
Yeah, it's a weird film. It's a Bertolucci film from the 70s. And it's about two people. It's a guy who's grieving. His wife has just died. And it's about two people having an anonymous sexual relationship where they don't even tell each other their names. It's like, can we have an anonymous relationship? And halfway through the film, Marlon Brando just starts giving this speech as his character, talking about his parents and how they were drunks. But his parents were drunks in reality. And essentially, he changed a couple of the details, but essentially he's giving a speech as Marlon Brando, basically, playing that character. And as said Ghosty was on, and we did a Marlon Brando special, and we were saying, I can't think of any other actor who would do that, who just bare themselves. You know, and it could be their own. I'm sure it's for their own reason, because you know everyone knows it's very cathartic to talk about yourself, and especially your demons. You know, I do it on my podcast. I love it. You know, it's an incredible opportunity to do it, and to actually have people listen to it as well. So, yeah.
Wow, you've transitioned well there.
I have, yeah. Well, otherwise we'd have gone for an hour on John Lennon.
We would, absolutely. So going into more detail then, so what's the history of the show? How would you describe it? And how did you get it off the ground?
Okay. Well, actually, the last time I talked to you, I think you were asking me about which podcasts I listened to or how I got started.
Yeah.
And the original podcast I listened to was stuff like Joe Rogan, although I've got a bit off Joe Rogan. But alternative media, really. So that was kind of one of my things. And then Beatles and music and films was another sort of strand of it. And then I thought, well, I've appeared as a guest on a few other shows, notably The Mind Renewed, which is it's a friend of mine.
Yeah.
And we talked about interesting stuff like advertising and propaganda and things like that. And then I kind of thought, obviously I had the John Lennon one, but I thought I've really got to do this. I've got to sort of do a general podcast that looks at alternative views and truth and things like that. So I finally got it going, and it's basically, I call it a search for inner and outer truth, because it's basically got two strands. The first strand is to do with the individual and things like, I mean, I've done a show on meditation, which I'm a great proponent of, and emotional intelligence, using the fantastic book by Daniel Goleman. So part of it is about yourself, because I'm also a life coach. I'm just gradually transitioning to doing that. And then the outer truth part is, like I say, alternative media. It's sort of pointing out the enormous limitations of a worldview that's based on, you know, mainstream media, you know, just reading the news and feeling that you're informed. And I kind of try and find a way of weaving those two strands together. And really psychology is it, really, because I'm a big believer, psychology really drives the world because psychology drives behavior.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm sort of trying to mix those two strands. But then within that, sometimes I just use the podcast as I would always say a dumping ground for things that I just want to get out there. Like I did you must have heard of 10 Rillington Place. The
I have. Yep.
famous murder, John Christie.
Yep. Richard Attenborough film.
Richard Attenborough film, absolutely. Well, I've been a big, I don't know, you can't say fan, can you? Because that's such a horrible case. Follower, interested in it. And I did a thing for YouTube with some Rillington Place experts and a guy who actually wrote the only biography of John Reginald Halliday Christie. And I thought, well, I'll put that in podcast form because some people prefer to have it in podcast form than to listening to something for an hour on YouTube. So yeah, inner and outer truth, and then occasional random. There's a story about table tennis, which I'll tell you about later.
Cool.
Yeah. I used to be a table tennis player. I used to play in the league when I was young with my dad. And yeah, I'll tell you about that later.
All right. I was about to say that, something like table tennis, you'd use that to sort of like, I don't know. Yeah. Calm. People use a lot of that stuff to sort of like have their own time and take themselves out of their problems, don't they, I suppose?
Yeah. Well, the actual show about it was, I could tell you now if you want. It was called The Way of the Nervous Official, a tragicomedy about table tennis. And ask yourself, where else would you find a tragicomedy about table tennis? And it was based on a real event. It was a guy who was going for his umpire certificate, and it was the finals of this local tournament that we all used to be in.
Yeah.
And he was officiating, and he made an absolute mess of all the umpiring. He kept giving the wrong scores. And he just made a complete mess of it. And everyone in the audience, being an English audience, they were sort of half trying to politely stifle their smiles and then half sort of sniggering, So I wrote, I sort of expanded it out, added a few imaginary details and wrote a blog post, which came out as about just a 20-minute audio. And I think that was the latest episode of Life and Life Only, actually. But that's quite funny. So if you want something that's a bit more humorous, and I talk about nerves as well. I'm sure we all suffer from nerves. So talk about like why that happens, what actually happens to your body when you suffer from nerves. So, yeah, that was a fun one.
I suffer from nerves because, especially with this show, because I haven't recorded for a while. So.
Yeah.
But then that can happen, can't it? If you don't do something for a long time that you used to, that can bring those nerves back again because you've almost like not quite lost, but there's that edge that you're used to it, and then when you stop doing something for so long and then come back to it, a little bit of that comes back again.
Well, you're absolutely right, because I used to teach in not schools as such, but language academies in Spain was the last place I was in. Yeah. And it's so weird. Yeah, you teach from September to June or July, and then by July you're like really firing, you're really into it, and then you have 2 months off. And we all used to say the same thing. You walk in the classroom and you have this horrible, like spaced out feeling where you don't know. I probably had it a bit more than most, where you suddenly like you feel weirdly disoriented because you've had 2 months where you haven't been surrounded by 10 people sort of hanging on your every word and expecting you to teach them English. Yeah, it's a weird feeling. Yeah.
So what actually happens then when you're in that situation? Do you just go for it, or do you have sort of like or did you have something within yourself that you used to do to get yourself ready for that and prepared?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Like I said, I'm now a life coach, and I'm still mainly an English teacher, but I've just got a few life coaching clients, and I realised that I've basically been self-coaching for probably all my life, but particularly say the last 10 years, where I've been on a kind of self-development, relentless self-development kick. Yeah, I mean, I just and it's almost like giving yourself a pep talk, not actually saying the words, but so saying, "Oh, don't worry, this happened last year. It's nothing." A lot of it is just saying, "Oh, it's just your mind. It's just your mind playing tricks." Because I think so many of our insecurities about things that it is in the end just our mind. Yeah. So my friend calls it mind over mind, rather than mind over matter. You got to conquer your own mind with your mind. If that makes any sense.
It does.
So, but the nerves thing is really interesting because what happens is, like, imagine, let's take table tennis or something like that. Imagine you're Roger Federer, Rafael Nadal. You've been playing tennis for 30 years and you have what's called muscle memory. So your arm knows exactly what to do. You don't have to think about it. You know, you think a little bit about tactics, but essentially when you go to play a backhand or a forehand, you know what to do. What happens when you get nervous is that you suddenly, just backtrack. You have a thing called expert amnesia, which means that when you become an expert at something, you don't have to think about how to do it. You just know how to do it. But what happens is when you get nervous, try and imagine this. You're in the Wimbledon final, or I talked about the snooker final. You probably remember Dennis Taylor and Steve Davis,
Yep.
years ago. Suddenly you're there in front of, thousands of people. And when you get nervous, you suddenly think, hang on, how do I do this? And you suddenly have to start thinking about, how do I line up the cue, or how do I line up my racket? And, it happens to guys, we've probably all been there when you're 16 and you go up to a female for the first time in your life and you suddenly forget how to speak. Don't know if that ever happened to you, but, you suddenly start tripping over your words. And the reason is because, in a funny way, you've almost forgotten, the nerves has taken away your expertise at speaking, just speaking, not speaking great things, but just speaking. And you suddenly got to remember, and it's a horrible feeling, but I think I just got over it through doing gigs and, being a teacher. I mean, I've been nearly 20 years being a teacher, to get used to standing in front of people. So you just get used to it. But yeah, I kind of self-coach, to answer your question, really. Give yourself a pep talk.
Well, talking about gigs, I'll go into my own history here with that one. I mean, so I mean, I used to be in bands playing bass mainly, so I remember that when I first started doing that, there were the nerves there from doing something that was, but then when you do it a lot in a band, those nerves don't show quite as much because, like you said, it's like almost like a second nature in a sense.
That's it.
But then if you go away from that for so long, I mean, oh dear me, I can't imagine what the nerves would be like now because I've not gigged in over 10, maybe 15 years. So I don't know what it'd be like now. So those nerves would probably be exactly the same if somebody suddenly said, "Oh, I've booked you in for doing a performance here," and then dear me.
Well, I found one way is to this sounds a horrible prospect, but do something that makes you even more nervous, and then in a funny way, the music. I'll give you an example. I used to do a bit of acting. I went to drama school and I did some amateur, and I did a couple of Shakespeare plays.
Okay.
With Shakespeare they weren't even like well-known ones. I think it was one called Love's Labour's Lost, which is not even one of his best known. And the nerves of trying to learn the lines, because it's English, of course, but it's obviously a different type of English. And so I remember I didn't know I hadn't quite learned the script properly. And someone said a line that I thought was my cue for my next line, but it wasn't. And suddenly you're like, oh, Jesus, where am I in this play? Like, because something like Hamlet, maybe, or Macbeth or King Lear, I know the plot very well, so I kind of know where we were. But this one, I was like, oh my God, where am I? Like that horrible feeling. And then I also did a little bit of stand-up comedy. I just did a course and a few like newcomers gigs. So it's an interesting thing where if you do something that's really, really, really scary, then the slightly scary thing like playing music doesn't seem so bad. So that's quite a good thing you can try. I don't know. But obviously doing the really scary thing is then a horrible prospect. But it's a sort of a way of, I don't know, navigating that, But it's a tricky one.
Hey, this is Jack from Bad Counsel. You want some good counsel? Keep listening to my man Marv, Pods Like Us.
I love that you pulled that one out, actually, Love's Labour's Lost, because it's there's some really good quotes and that from there that have become sort of, well, they've been paraphrased sort of over the years, but they've become almost people will say them paraphrased almost by rote now, such as the beauty is brought by the judgment of the eye and things like that, which is almost over the years changed into what we call, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, I suppose. But Yeah, it's one of those where people are used to certain plays and stories that Shakespeare's come up with, and something like that, you could almost say it's a bit out of left field because people don't think about that. If they're thinking about something along those lines, I think of something like Much Ado About Nothing, which has a similarity to it ish. But yeah, I like the fact that you've pulled that one out because it is more out there as a choice of one of his plays to discuss.
Yeah, well, I think it was just chosen by our teacher. I think they just purposely just didn't want us to do Hamlet because I suppose it's very difficult to start doing to be or not to be speech, knowing all the history of it and all the actors who've done it before you. So I think it was it was a smart choice by our drama teacher to choose that one. We did Merchant of Venice, which I always quite liked.
Yeah, I like that one. We
did Measure for Measure, which is a good one. It's sort of minor Shakespeare, but as you know, minor Dylan, minor Beatles, minor whatever is often as good or better than the famous ones, eh?
It's a bit like Hemingway, where everybody will think of Old Man of the Sea and stories like that. But I like The Pearl very much. I think that's a great story. I really like that one, and that's not one that people would think of with Hemingway. Yeah,
I mean, bands get stuck, don't they? With Led Zeppelin got a bit stuck with Stairway. Thin Lizzy got stuck with The Boys Are Back in Town. Often it's just, I think commercial and good are often not the same thing. Yeah, or sometimes stuff is more accessible. Yeah. So you probably find to someone starting out with Shakespeare, they probably find Hamlet is a very accessible story. Because although it gets a bit complicated towards the end with all the poisonings and everything, essentially it's a pretty simple story. But then you get other ones which are very, very convoluted.
Yeah, in the musical realm, you've got that where there are sort of songs where I don't know what it is. A bit like Lemmy used to get fed up with from Motorhead. He used to get fed up with the Ace of Spades. Colin Hay from Men at Work, he absolutely hates the song Down Under, and there's a lot of groups that are like that, where there'll be the song that's the more famous song, but they themselves are fed up with that song.
Yeah, there's a really funny. Did you used to watch Big Train?
Yes. Yeah.
Do you remember the one with Ralph McTell?
Okay, go on.
Really funny. Ralph McTell had a song called Streets of
London. Yeah.
Yeah. Just for your overseas listeners, Big Train was like a sketch show. Simon Pegg was in it, wasn't he? He was in Shaun of the Dead, various other people. Yeah. They had a thing where, I can't remember which actor it is, but they're playing Ralph McTell. He's just finishing off Streets of London. And it's a kind of a folky crowd, little folk club. And everyone's clapping and going, oh, yeah, brilliant. And then Ralph McTell says, I'm going to play you a new song. And then the audience immediately starts sort of whispering among themselves and looking disgruntled, and they all start going, no, Streets of London, Streets of London, like, as if they just want him to play that song over and over again. Oh, it's brilliant. Yeah. So you can get saddled. I mean, if you're lucky, even think of the Stones, how big the Stones are. In the end, they probably have to play, what would it be? Satisfaction, Honky Tonk Women, Brown Sugar. What else would it be? Jumping Jack Flash, Sympathy for the Devil. They're almost obliged to play 6 or 7 songs, aren't they? Even with a massive back catalogue like them.
You've reminded me of that. Do you remember the story of Jimi Hendrix when he used to do concerts and people used to shout titles out to him?
Oh, did they?
They used to shout song titles out to him, and Jimi Hendrix used to shout back, "I'm not a jukebox, for God's sake."
Oh yeah, was that Jimi Hendrix?
That was Jimi Hendrix who used to say
I heard that from Bill Hicks. Used to say that.
Yeah. But Jimi Hendrix used to say that in the 60s as well.
Did he?
Yeah, he did.
Do you want to hear a really weird fact about Jimi Hendrix? Well,
go on.
I went to see a Jimi Hendrix tribute act years and years ago, probably in about the 90s, and they said they were announcing their next song. Do you know the song "Third Stone from the Sun"?
I do very much,
etc. It's a sort of science fiction-y song. They said, we reckon Jimi Hendrix because he used to watch a lot of telly in England. We reckon he was a Coronation Street fan. And this guy said, because if you think about Coronation Street, it goes,
Yep.
and if you think about it, it does sound pretty similar. So they proceeded to play Coronation Street in the style of Third Stone from the Sun, and then segued into Third Stone from the Sun, which is very funny. Here's a weird one, Jimmy, because Noel Redding's mum, the bass player Noel Redding, his mum really liked Jimmy, and she was really protective of him. And she used to say things like, "Oh, that poor young man, he needs a good night's sleep or something." Because Jimi Hendrix, by about 69, he looked like he hadn't slept for, weeks. And the other famous one is the song "Fire."
Yeah.
It was like a snowy night or a cold night in England. Jimmy said to Noel Redding's mum, "Oh, can I stand next to your fire?" And then turn that into a song. Yeah, it's great.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
Didn't think.
Should we go back to Life and Life Only?
Possibly, because I was going to carry on down there. Then we need to go back to the story, the podcast we're talking about.
Yeah.
So, how do you research the subjects that you're talking about in the show, and how do you come up with the subjects as well?
I mean, honestly, kind of like with the John Lennon one, I'd already had 10 years of accumulating, ideas and material, because I used to have a blog, which is pretty extensive. And so quite a lot of the Life and Life Only shows tend to be me reading an essay I've written, or an essay that someone else has written. In the case of War is a Racket, which is one of the recent famous Smedley Darlington Butler short book.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is already there. And what I do typically is I'll read this essay and then I'll interject with comments. Some of them are sort of updates, like I think one of the most important ones I've done is one called "Conspiracy Theory: A Powerful Phrase," because it's very interesting how a conspiracy theory is a real thing.
Yep.
But I don't know if you've noticed this, but now it's become a complete catch-all phrase. If you try and give somebody a narrative that's not what the mainstream narrative is, they get this sort of weird allergic reaction. They sort of look at you in a strange way and say, "Oh, you're not into conspiracies, are you?" or something like that. So that was one of the big ones, and I kind of updated it with quite a lot of evidence. I think I did that one last year, but I'd originally written the blog post in 2014, something like that. So I updated it with sort of some new sort of interjections. So the research is already there, really. But obviously, if I get you're mentioning the Doug Valentine one that you told me you'd listened to.
Yeah.
I read his book, The Phoenix Program, which is about a program in Vietnam that most people would have no idea even existed. And then I did the audio book, very long, something like 15 hours or something, of a book he did called The CIA as Organized Crime, which is just absolutely fascinating, just mind-blowing stuff. So obviously sometimes it's books you have to read, or I had a guest on called Austin Moore, who's an NLP practitioner, and he showed me an interview that he'd done of about an hour. So I watched that. So in common with podcasts, I suppose, it's books. Yep. Sometimes it's books, sometimes it's often if I have a guest on, I'll probably listen to a couple of other podcasts they've done just to get an idea of what they're like, or but at the same time I try not to preempt too much, try and leave it fresh. Yeah.
So, well, if you're keeping it as fresh as you can, then that's going into the subject more. That's sort of like it lends itself to your show better that way, because you're allowing them to bring themselves out more, and you're delving into it rather than going into it knowing everything about the subject. It's more you gleaning that information from the person, which is what makes the show interesting.
Yeah, and I think my secret weapon is editing, because I don't edit in the sense that it changes the conversation, because as we know, you can, especially with TV, when you watch something on TV, it could be edited
very, very
differently to create a very different thing. I don't do that. But what I do is I say to myself, because I'm going to be editing it, just go for it. And if, you ask a question that doesn't go anywhere, it doesn't matter because you can just cut it out. Yeah. So I try and give myself as much of a free license as I can during the recording to just try things, It's like, again, it's like music, isn't it? When I was recording my albums in Madrid, I would just, on the takes or when I was writing the songs, just give yourself a license to do anything. Because if you're going to be editing it later, you can format it a little bit. I think last time I was on, you were asking me about advice. And I think I was saying, try to find a balance between loose and slightly smooth, yep, without being slick. I think there's a distinction between smooth and slick. Because personally, this is only my personal opinion, I'm not into those podcasts, which is a couple of friends just talking for hours and hours and with no editing whatsoever and just lots of sort of in jokes. You find yourself doing it when I do film reviews. Sometimes there'll be an in joke between the two of you that people wouldn't understand, which is fine. But so basically I try and be as free as possible during the conversation and then sort of sort it out later. And sometimes there've been some quite big editing jobs where people have mentioned something that we were talking about earlier, and they've mentioned something that they forgot to say, and then you've got to slot it in, and it's a bit tricky at times, but it's kind of worth it when you hear it back.
It's a bit like you've mentioned Douglas, but actually during the show itself, we've not mentioned him at all. That was pre-show when we were talking about.
Oh, was it? Right. Well, that was an interesting one. Yeah, it's a guy, like I said, Douglas Valentine. He's written these books about Vietnam and the CIA. And the thing is, he's actually hard of hearing.
Okay.
And he was following the Skype subtitles. And I invite you and the listeners to check out the Skype subtitles sometimes. It's quite hilarious because they're not bad, but, they're phonetically done. So sometimes you get this, when subtitles are done phonetically, you get this sort of weird poetry sometimes. So he was following that. So a couple of times, he actually answered a question that was completely different to the one I'd asked him. But he was such a good guest. Like, he had so many amazing insights that, I just sort of worked it out in the editing.
How did you do that then? Did you do any re-record from your end so that the questions were changed to go that way?
No, what happened from memory is he sort of answered a question. Like I say, he answered not completely different, but a slightly different question. And then I think I sort of repeated the question I'd said earlier.
Yep.
So I tagged his later answer to my original question. And then I tagged the extra bit. I sort of tagged it onto one of his answers. So I think it came out a little bit funny at various times, but I think the information was so good that he was putting out that it didn't really matter, But I've had a few adventures with that. I've had people who, one time I was recording and their voice came out terribly, but they'd done their own recording where their voice came out well. So I had to stitch the two together, which took, just hours and hours because we hadn't started the recordings at the same time. Oh God. Yeah. Editing can be a bit hideous at times, but like I say, it's worth it when you hear it back and it sounds nice,
yeah. And Chen does that actually, something similar to that. When he'll record his show when they was Fab, and he will. So you'll say something all between you all, and then he'll suddenly say, "Oh, I'm just going to say this now so I can edit it in," and then he'll say something, and the reason is because it wasn't quite clear. Or the answer didn't quite, it was almost exactly the same as the question he asked, but it had gone into a slightly different era where he's saying, well, if I worded the question this way instead, it fits better with the answer that you gave. And he will then edit it after that to work that way.
Yeah. And I love his editing, because
so
I don't know if you saw, but I put... I was on his show 2 years and a half ago, maybe. We did a commentary on the Rutles, talking over the film. and I just put it on YouTube, but we recorded it about a year and a half ago, like I said.
Yeah.
And it was really tricky because we were on, is it Zencaster he uses?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we had the film going on YouTube, and then obviously we're doing a commentary, but we can't see each other. It's audio. And there were a couple of bits, and he did an amazing job of syncing. Because with commentaries, you've got to have the film going in the background, just in case people aren't watching along with it. Obviously, we encourage them to watch along. It's much easier.
Yeah.
Just did this with Jaws, actually, for my film podcast. Did a Jaws audio commentary. And he managed to stitch it all together. It was very impressive, particularly since he's now back to putting out a show a week.
Yeah.
So I kind of put out roughly a show a week, but across my 3 podcasts. And then if I'm in trouble, I'll put something out from ages ago. Give it new life. Yeah. But I don't really feel any pressure to get anything out, because I'm actually soon to be monetizing. I think I'm going to start Patreon soon, but up to now I haven't been monetizing. So again, it's fairly free, don't have a boss or an editor.
G'day. This is Matty C from the Astros Fantasy Football Podcast, way down in Australia. And we love getting to listen to Marv meet new podcasters from all over the world here on the Pods Like Us podcast.
I'm terrible. I've got Patreon. I've got a Patreon account, but I never ever mention it because I almost feel like, I don't know whether it's a British thing, with the, but it's almost embarrassed to say to people, I've got this Patreon, and if you want to give a couple of quid or something, it's quite helpful.
Yeah, I think it could be. Yeah. I think it could well be an English thing. Yeah. Because on Life and Life Only, a lot of the stuff I say is quite provocative.
Yeah.
Because again, the general conceit of the show is that, again, I believe, and I used to work with activists in London, so I've had some experience. I still believe that the majority of people follow mainstream news and more or less believe it.
Yeah.
Whereas I think mainstream news is a good source for just events, like as in the US of pulling out of Afghanistan. But I think having discovered podcasts and things, that people who would do 2, 3, 4 hours of analysis, you realize how incredibly more complex the world is than the one that's presented to us. Yeah. So what I do is, again, this is my English side. I don't apologize, because I think that's wrong to say I'm sorry for having alternative views, because they're based on a lot of the time on research as well as intuition. But I do kind of say, look, I'm not here to offend anyone. However, this is my podcast. I've taken the time to create it. I'm obviously paying for it. It's not very expensive, but, Podbean fees and all that.
Yes.
I bought the equipment. This is my platform, and I'm going to say what the hell I want, and if you don't like it, you're free to turn it off. This is the thing. This is kind of the thing. Do you remember Jerry Sadowitz, the Scottish stand-up comedian?
Yep.
Yeah, really, really, again, not inflammatory in terms of, politics or anything like that. Just making really, really inflammatory jokes and stuff. And I went to see him, actually. I was in Australia. I was backpacking in Australia. I went to the Melbourne Comedy Festival, and he was there. And I actually met him, and I kind of suspected this, but he's a really kind of quiet, soft-spoken bloke in private. It's weird. I mean, we were at a bar, but I mean, he'd stopped performing. But halfway through his concert, because he'd got in the Melbourne papers for being offensive, and he said, look, if you're offended, what the are you doing at my show? You can't come to my show and then start being outraged. It's the same with podcasts. If someone says something that, like a conspiracy theory or something that offends you, then just turn it off. But if you choose to listen, that probably means that you're slightly interested in it, and you believe maybe there is a kernel of truth there. So, the English side is definitely kind of, we have to apologize for breathing almost, don't we? But we can all break that. You can break that conditioning gradually. Hang out with some Americans, because they seem to be a lot. I remember when I lived in Asia, there was a American woman who I was quite friendly with, because she was a teacher as well. And I noticed, like, when she would talk to people, instead of saying, "Oh, could you do this?" or "Would you mind if you did that?" or "I was wondering if you could do this," she would just say, "Can you do this? Could you do this?" Just more directly. And I just felt like you just get things done much quicker. Because British English is full. As an English teacher, I could tell you, British English is full of, could you do this? I was wondering if you could. Do you think you could? Sorry for asking, but could you? So it's full of all these ways of making everything sound much more indirect. So sometimes, hang out with some Americans or some Aussies, and it's just like direct.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
There's some good podcasts from Australia while we're just going past that. Yeah. I've spoken with Matty from Astro League podcast, which when I first heard that, I thought it's the weirdest thing ever, because it's an it's Australians doing a fantasy American football league.
All right.
So it's just pretty different out there.
I like you might like my favorite album with Jeremy Dillon. Don't know if you ever come across that.
Yep, I have come across that.
That's a good one.
That's really good. Yeah.
Thing with podcasting, I'm sure you'll agree, when you get to like somebody's voice or their delivery, obviously the content's got to be good, but you kind of start to like them, and that's a good way where I like Jeremy Dillon's voice. He always sounds very upbeat and very open. So then that's a good way to learn new music, because I'll listen to an episode of his show of a band. I know someone like Steely Dan. I think he did one on Steely Dan or someone like that, where I don't really know them that well. I probably know all the famous songs, but it's a good way, obviously, to learn new music. Like you probably saw I posted about. Oh yeah, you did. Yeah, Squeeze. I've come very, very late to the party with Squeeze. Obviously, I knew Cool for Cats and Up the Junction, but I heard someone talking about it on a podcast, and I thought, oh yeah, I've never really investigated that. And I've only listened probably to their greatest hits, but it's funny, isn't it? Like, again, I think we were talking before we started recording, like when you're with somebody, if you're watching a film or listening to something, an album, and you're with someone who loves it, their kind of energy rubs off on you.
That's true.
Hey there, this is Bobby with the Rock Guys Podcast, and you are listening to Marv Smooth on the Pods Like Us podcast. Check him out.
It's like going to see a film at the cinema, and the energy of everybody in that cinema will alter the way that you look at a film. So if you'd have waited and you'd have watched that film on your own at home, the atmosphere there would be completely different to you being in an audience in a theatre or cinema with 100 people.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. And in fact, when we did the Jaws audio commentary, you can actually see some video, not in our commentary, but from one of the Jaws documentaries. They actually filmed people in the cinema watching Jaws.
Okay.
And if you remember the famous bit where the head pops out about halfway through the film, or the bit where you very first see the shark when Brody's doing the chumming, throwing the meat out, and suddenly the shark's head comes. They filmed people in the cinema like jumping out of their seats.
Yeah,
I don't think people quite do that anymore. I think we maybe as a society we're a bit more sort of too cool for school almost, because I think when I was a kid, I remember I'd go to the cinema. This is in the 80s. Yeah. And sometimes people would like to stand up and applaud at the end of the film. Or, I mean, obviously, this is not surprising, but I went to see, I think it was Rocky IV, the one against the Russian. And again, like now I watch that back and it's just cringy, like anti-Russian, just the crudest propaganda you can imagine. Yeah. At the time, I'm 10 years old. I love Rocky. I still like the original film. I think it's great. And of course, you're cheering for Rocky. And everyone in the cinema was going, come on, Rocky, But I just feel like now, I mean, I don't really go to the cinema much, but I feel like now that wouldn't quite happen anymore. I don't know. Energy, you're right, the energy is still there for sure. Yeah.
I would say that Rocky is my, I think that's, to me, the best boxing film. To me.
Interesting.
The first Rocky.
Yeah. Well, Raging Bull is actually my favourite film of all time.
Which I've not seen. No.
Oh, you haven't seen it, right? No, but I love the first Rocky. I mean, boxing is just made for being filmed, I think. I mean, I wasn't totally mad on $1 Million Baby, but it's pretty good, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, the original Rocky's great, isn't it? That was such an amazing year because you had in the same year Rocky, Network, Taxi Driver, and All the President's Men, all vying for Best Picture.
Absolutely.
Isn't that incredible?
It is. Yeah.
And Rocky won, of course.
Yeah. Well, yes. Yep.
Yeah. I think with the Academy Awards, Rocky's always going to win over Taxi Driver, isn't it? It's like Forrest Gump won over Pulp Fiction. I was really annoyed that year.
Yes. Yeah. A lot of people have been annoyed over that. That's one of those subjects, isn't it? You know, it's Pulp Fiction or Forrest Gump, and yeah.
There's another one was the year that Raging Bull came out, a film called Ordinary People, which I haven't actually seen, directed by Robert Redford.
Yeah,
that one, and you could see, you know, the more wholesome. Forrest Gump's always going to be a bit more wholesome than Pulp Fiction, isn't it? Because it's giving a different message. You know.
Yeah. Would Rocky be the only Academy Award that Stallone's had then?
That's still what, sorry?
Would Rocky be the only Academy Award that Stallone's actually got? Sylvester Stallone.
Yes, he won a Golden Globe for acting in one of the Creed films. Creed 2, maybe? Either Creed or Creed 2.
I liked Creed 1 a lot. I've not seen Creed 2. Creed 1, the first Creed film, I thought that was a great film.
Yeah, I've seen that once. I saw Creed 2 on a plane on the way to India 2 years ago. There's a random memory. I like watching films on planes. There's something nice about it. I don't know. Something weird about watching it when you're thousands of miles up in the air. Yeah. I think the first one he got nominated for acting. Did he win for writing? Maybe. Yeah, I think he did, didn't he? He won for writing. And I think the other Rocky sequels, I don't think they were really nominated for anything.
No.
Because they are much more, they're so different from the first one, aren't they? They're much more kind of just pure entertainment, really.
Yeah. I would say that, my favourite Rocky film is the first one, and then possibly the second one is my second favourite. It just flows perfectly out of the first film. And after that, there's almost a slight change in the overall style of the films compared to the first two.
Yeah. I watched them in a weird order, actually. I remember I watched them 2, 4, 3, 1.
Okay.
I had no idea why. I think Rocky 2 came on TV, and I just thought, I just fancy watching this. Because we used to watch stuff as a family, you know. We really miss that now, don't we? But me and my sisters and my parents, with the 5 of us, even my grandparents would be there sometimes. We watched Rocky 2, and then I think Rocky 4 came out at the cinema, and it had lots of hype, obviously. So we watched that at the cinema, and then a friend of ours had the video of Rocky 3. But what was weird is that if you remember in Rocky 4, there's a very long montage when he's in his car and he's thinking back to all the other films. So you suddenly see like Rocky looking really young in Rocky 1, and you see Adrian when she was really shy, with the hat and the glasses. You're like, wow, that's weird. And then you watch Rocky. I don't know about you, but if as a kid, if you watch the first Rocky, it's probably not going to be your favorite because it seems slow and it doesn't have that instant accessibility.
Yeah.
But then as an adult, I think clearly it's the best of the films. But people can disagree, of course. But I think it's a lovely film.
Yeah. Hot take that I think Talia Shire, who plays the girlfriend / wife Adrian in Rocky, I think she's a great actress.
Well, she was in the 2 Godfathers, wasn't she?
Well, the 3. We'll pretend that the third one didn't exist.
Oh, yeah, of course. Oh, I didn't think it was too bad but compared to the other 2. Yeah, she's in those first 2, wasn't she? Yeah. Oh, she's brilliant. Yeah.
She is.
The only criticism of Rocky actually is that the sudden transformation. When she takes off the hat and the glasses and becomes very confident. It sort of happens a bit too quickly for me. It's like that shy person that she used to be is like completely disappeared. But who cares? Rocky's it's a fairy tale. It's a great film.
Well, that whole thing of taking the glasses off and suddenly getting confidence is one of the biggest tropes going, isn't it? Really?
Of course, yeah. That's what I mean. It's very old fashioned, and I have a feeling probably the studio had a lot more to do with that. Although I think Stallone is quite old-fashioned in a way. But I would urge you to watch Raging Bull. It's very different. It's very, very visceral. It's very. It's a whole different way of looking at boxing, really, because it's not really actually about. Because just very briefly, the background was that Scorsese wasn't a boxing fan. He was persuaded to do this film, and he suddenly realized, oh, the ring is a metaphor. Is this confined space is a metaphor for our lives and all the way we're confined, the way we create traps for ourselves. So it's very heightened. I mean, if you think Rocky was a bit gory, then Raging Bull has all these close-ups of sort of sweat and blood flying off somebody's face. It's not for everyone, but Robert De Niro is spectacular in that film. Yeah.
Hi, this is Katie at Bad Counsel with some good counsel. You should keep listening to Marv at Pods Like Us.
Anyway, less about films, because that's another one of your podcasts.
I'm very busy earning no money from podcasts, aren't I?
We are, all of us. So how do you find the guests that you have on your show, and then how do you get them onto your show?
Again, like more or less the same with the John Lennon ones. Some people in this glorious world we live in now, which is sometimes glorious, sometimes not. Douglas Valentine, again, I just heard him on a couple of podcasts, just wrote to him on his website, and then about a week later he said, yeah, I'll talk to you. And it just gets set up like that. Austin Moore, who was the NLP guy, he's the brother of a friend of mine who I used to teach with years ago.
Yeah.
Who else is there? Yeah, I mean, you just make acquaintances over the years. Oh, I did a show on. I'm going to guess you're a Black Mirror fan. The one Nosedive, the one about the social ratings.
I haven't actually seen Black Mirror.
Oh, that's really good. I think it's my favorite episode of Black Mirror.
Okay.
It's the one what they have now in China, the social credit system. It's a heightened version of that, where everywhere you go, you're just constantly rating people. Really, really interesting. I saw a really good analysis of that on YouTube from a guy called Harry. And again, there was an email address, and I just wrote to him and I said, oh, do you fancy, because his video had only been 20 minutes. I said, do you fancy, doing a deep dive on that? And people just generally say yes. You don't get rebuffed too much. Some people are busy. And I think when we were talking last time, I said, I'm not really interested in having famous people on my shows.
Yeah.
Because, even let's take Paul McCartney, someone like that. I'm sure if Paul McCartney wrote to me and said, I'd really like to be on Glass Onion, I wouldn't turn him down, of course. But in a funny way, anytime that I've had any contact with someone who's slightly famous, essentially you're going to get less time. They'll probably say, oh, I've only got 30 minutes or whatever. And they're going to start giving you these stock answers.
Absolutely.
Even Doug Valentine, who's not really famous, but he's sort of a respected author, he kind of started doing that a little bit, and I had to kind of, again, I sorted it out with editing, but I had to kind of get him off that tack of giving those same answers. So I tend to contact people who are either not famous or not particularly famous, but just whose work I like. And most people, they just say yes, generally. You word it in a particular way, flatter them a little bit. Everyone likes a bit of that.
Yeah, it's interesting you should say that, because for the other podcast that I do, which is the George Harrison podcast, we've got an episode coming out where we spoke with Ken Womack and Jason Krupa about the new George Harrison, Eric Clapton book that they've written, All Things Must Pass Away, and other love stories, or other assorted love stories. And so we had Ed Chen on as a third chair. So there was me, Hudson, and Ed. And on the lead up to it, I was talking with Ed and explaining to him that, I've purposely avoided listening to any of the other, because the other plethora of Beatles-related shows, because as we both know, there's a lot of them. Mm-hmm. And so I've avoided listening to those because I didn't want them to picture the way that or the questions that I'd end up asking the two of them. And then Ed actually gave me a really good answer to that. And he said, I look at it in the way that if I hear another show talking to an author about a book, he said, then sometimes I'll purposely take note of the questions that they've been asked so many times, and I'll avoid that, and I'll be looking at the questions that they're not asking.
Yeah, I do exactly the same thing. Actually, I've done that. I've written down areas because when you talk, especially, I think Ken and Jason have done the rounds of a lot of the Beatles shows. The same as Chip Madinger and Mark Easter.
Yep.
When they brought out 8 Arms to Hold You, they contacted me and said, "Oh, would you like us to be on the show?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." And then I found, they'd already been on 4 or 5 other ones. So yeah, I did the same. Yeah, and I often say to guests, actually, I just make it clear to them that I'm sensitive to the fact that they've been asked this stuff. Like Dan Richter, I had Dan Richter on a couple of times.
Yeah.
And every man and his dog has asked him about Stanley Kubrick and what's it like working on 2001 and what was John Lennon like. Rod Davis as well, of the Quarrymen. He actually said to me, like, with characteristic sort of Scouse directness, I said off mic, I said, "Oh, what's it like doing these interviews?" And he said, "Oh, it does get a bit boring when people ask the same stuff." So, I try and do the same. Sometimes it's a bit unavoidable, but I really believe that podcasts, particularly, like I say, since they're generally non-commercial, there's not really any point just asking the same questions that someone's going to be asked if they go on, BBC Radio or something. Yeah. Because then otherwise, just they go on BBC Radio. We have this outlet to come at things from different angles, and I think that's the beauty of it. So I was trying to think of a person. A guy called Go on. Sorry.
I was going to say I remember somebody back in the old days. A lot of bands and artists used to do pre-recorded question answers, didn't they? And they used to send them out to different radio stations and places. And so what would happen would be that then they would pre-record the pretend interviewer asking a question and then have the pre-recorded answers that the record company have sent out to all of these radio stations.
Yeah.
So I mean that's it in a nutshell, basically, where they're all giving the same answers to everything all the time.
Yeah.
Whereas what you're trying to do then, and what I learned from that Ed said, was don't do that. Instead, look for where people haven't gone into, the subjects that people haven't broached, and then there you've got the more interesting thing, because dear me, I'm going back to the Beatles again, and I'd really rather not.
That's all right.
But it's the stock of, oh well, how many times can Paul McCartney rehash the Yesterday story?
Yeah. Well, he managed to again, didn't he, for that 3-2-1?
Yeah, and he got a few of his facts wrong in that, shall we say? Anyway.
Oh, did he? I haven't actually watched it, but I thought I took the shortcut and listened to a few of the guys reviewing it instead. Probably get there eventually. But,
yeah. I was watching it last. Actually, I was watching it last night, 3-2-1, and there was one bit in there where, because Louise was at the side of me and she was doing something else. She wasn't that interested or whatever, but a bit, is in the background for Louise. And then I sort of paused it and I said to Louise, I said, he's been very economical with the truth there, or economical. I said, because, and she said, how so? And I said, so they're on about the song Back in the USSR. And Paul said to Rick Rubin, he said, oh, I think what happened there was that I suggested to Ringo about, I've got this idea for the drums, but like this, that, and the other. And then Ringo just said, well, you can play the drums if you like on there. And then I said to Louise, he's being economical with the truth there, because that's not really what happened. I said, because actually Ringo walked out and came back almost a week later, didn't he? I think that's what really happened.
Yeah. The drum kit was decked with flowers, surrounded by flowers. Yeah,
absolutely. So there's an economy to the way that Paul answered the questions, and then he was on about another one where he said, "Oh, while we were filming, was it Help or something or other?" And then he mentioned that while they were filming Help, John had said to him something about liking the song Here, There, and Everywhere, and and then you look at the thing and you think, well, actually, he didn't write Here, There, and Everywhere till the following year or 2 years later,
Yeah, Revolver. Yeah.
So
yeah, it's I don't know if you're a tennis fan, but I kind of got into it a little bit this summer, Wimbledon and the US Open. But when you watch those press conferences and they go, so Novak, Djokovic or whatever, Andy Murray, so what did you think of your game today? They just have to say, yeah, I played well in the first set. And it's just like, same with football, really, isn't it? With sport, it's a thing like, well, what are you going to say? Like, I played well in the first set. Didn't play so well. My backhand was good today. My serve was good. And I was just thinking, God, it must be so boring. I mean, okay, they have a privileged life. They get paid very well, etc.
Yeah.
But have you ever seen the documentary Radiohead, Meeting People Is Easy?
No, but I would love to see that because I love Radiohead.
Yeah, I do as well. It's sort of Ben's OK Computer era. It's definitely pre-Kid A.
Yeah.
And, you can tell very quickly that Radiohead, they're quite shy, actually.
Yeah.
Particularly, maybe not Tom so much, but the others. And they're kind of they're very artistic, creative people. And you can just tell they're just so tired of this crap, just these boring questions. And they have to do these, you see them doing these inserts. Hi, this is Ed from Radiohead. You're watching MTV. And you can just see at his face. I mean, I haven't seen the doc for years, but I remember it. And you're thinking, oh, God, I know he's in a privileged position. I know he's earning a lot of money, but you still kind of think, oh, poor guy, In the sense, he just looks so uncomfortable. And with Paul, I mean, I've been commenting on it recently, and it's very tricky when you've got a John Lennon podcast, because when you start saying negative things about Paul McCartney, the sort of tribal stuff comes out, and people will intimate, oh, you're a Lennon guy or whatever. I'm doing a John Lennon podcast because I tend to connect more with him, but I've said a million times I think they're perfectly equal. But the thing with Paul McCartney, he's just everywhere. It's like you never get any space to breathe. He brings out McCartney 3. Before you know it, there's McCartney reimagined, and then he's doing something else. He's just always there. And I was saying recently, I hope he lives a long life, but when he eventually goes, there'll be a huge reappraisal, and he'll get, in a way, more love then.
Yep.
Because obviously you get more love when you're not around for various reasons, psychological reasons, and sort of just because people suddenly realize there's not going to be any more music.
Yep.
But the guy is just everywhere, and I've been staying off social media a lot because, you join a lot of Beatles groups, and the first thing you see is like Beatles, Paul McCartney, John Lennon, and it can kill it for you, and I don't listen to the other guys' shows so much anymore, partly because I don't know, I don't want to have that feeling where if they do a really good show, I don't want that kind of ego thing of, oh, fuck, I wish I'd talked about that or something. I don't want to feel that, because I just want to feel like that they're just my friends and we're all in the same family, if you you know what I mean. I don't want to feel competitive or I don't want, the ego to protrude. So, but it's just tricky. Like Paul McCartney is so overexposed. I mean, the guy's just everywhere. Sometimes you kind of wish he'd just take a 6-month break, but I suppose in his time of life, he doesn't really want to, does he? He wants to get it all out before he eventually passes.
Yeah, plus he's got that work ethic already instilled in him from back in the day as well.
But even up to the age of 80, I mean, that's incredible.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, it's the boys from Soft Spoken, and we are so glad that you are listening to our new friend Marv and his podcast, Pods Like Us.
Yeah, we were recently on the show for a couple of episodes, and we really enjoyed it. And if you'd like to catch a little bit more of us with all the raunchiness and sauce-based humor that you're used to, feel free to check us out on our show. But in the meantime, keep enjoying Pods Like Us with Marv.
We enjoyed talking with Marv as much as we hope you enjoy listening to him.
Now back to the show.
But you're right, yeah, when people pass away, There is a reappraisal because it's happened over the years with Cobain and other people as well. I can see it happening with Chris Cornell and Soundgarden as well, and people like that.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, I just saw last week. Oh, you probably saw this, did you? When Nirvana came to Britain, did you see that last week?
No, I didn't see that.
I think it was on BBC or ITV.
Very
sure
rarely
you can get
watched
it on catch up.
Yeah, probably.
Really, really good, because Nirvana, rather like Jimmy, they kind of made it more in Britain than in America initially. And there's some really lovely stories of them staying in these B&Bs and these really like cheap hotels in London. And everyone speaks just really well of them. Just said, oh, they were really nice. You know. But I think Kurt Cobain, I think Nirvana's music has just aged fantastically. You know, I was listening to some of it the other day. And I think it's just quality, absolute quality. I didn't realize, again, I got from this documentary, Kurt Cobain was actually talking about the Beatles. And he said, I love the Beatles and I love Led Zeppelin.
Yep.
And I suddenly realized Nirvana is actually a mixture of Beatles melodies and sort of Led Zeppelin style hard rock. I was suddenly thinking, wow, I think that's why I like it so much. It's obviously the lyrics have got that personalization, but it's almost the Beatles meets Led Zeppelin. I love that.
That's a good point, because
I'd never thought of that. I'm not taking credit for that. That was Kurt who said that.
Because you've made me realise now about that, because so Mike from the podcast My Classic Albums, mentioned another podcast again, he's asking people for, because of it being, I think, did you say something about it being the 30th anniversary or something of Nevermind, yeah. So he's talking about that on a future episode, and he wants people's memories of it or opinions, and he's asked people's favourite song. So I was saying to Mike that I have trouble with that, because I think there's so many good songs on that album. And when I eventually and you've made me realise now why I ended up picking the song that I did. So I said, you know, I could have picked In Bloom, I could have picked Lithium. I said, but in the end, I ended up picking Come As You Are. And I mean, there's memory of that from when I've been in bands and we actually played that, Come As You Are. You know, most people would remember Teen Spirit and Go For The Obvious. And thinking about it now, I can see why I've probably picked Come As You Are, is because it is that. It's the riff mentality of the, or the riff feel of the Led Zeppelin, but with the melodicism of the Beatles.
Absolutely. Yeah. That was such a revelation when he said that. Like, I just watched the documentary like 3 days ago.
I've not thought about that until you just said it, and it's just made me realise exactly why that song resonates with me.
Yeah, I love it. I love In Bloom. Because do you remember the video where they pretend to be like a really nice 60s band?
I actually mentioned that in my description when I was saying the picking the songs and going, well, I could have gone for that. And then when I put In Bloom, I put in brackets, great video.
Oh, I love it.
So do I.
I love it because it just tells you so much about them. Unless, you know, maybe it was it could have been someone else's idea, but it's like, we're not actually taking ourselves that seriously. We're taking the piss out of, you know, that sort of harmless rock.
Well, there is that, but I also think that the effect of the video as well, where they've made it aged, I think that's telling you something as well, where they have an inspiration from music of that time.
Yeah, oh, definitely, yeah. Well, another thing, again, I don't know if you remember this, at the beginning of Territorial Pissings.
Yep.
You know, they say, come on, people now, get together, love one another. That's actually a song from the 60s. I didn't realize for years. It's like, come on, people now, get together. It's a sort of hippie anthem.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I can't remember who it's by. Someone listening will be shouting the answer now.
You know what I should do is every time, now we've done this, I should look for like sounds of money dropping into a thing. So every time you mention something to me and I'm going, oh, yeah, I could just go, pling.
Yeah.
That's sound effects.
Yeah. Great band. But yeah, the thing about you're saying about after people die, it also happens actually. It happened with Muhammad Ali actually, although he only died in 2016.
Yeah.
After he was stricken with Parkinson's. I'm going to sound terribly cynical now, but if you notice, suddenly he gets equated with Martin Luther King and people like that. And Muhammad Ali was an important person, but he was also a pretty flawed character.
Yeah.
If you know the story of Malcolm X, I think Muhammad Ali, this is a tangent we can't go on now, but I think Muhammad Ali was majorly brainwashed by the Nation of Islam. Elijah Muhammad, who just happened to father something like 8 children with 6 different women who were his secretaries. So yeah, very holy man. And Muhammad Ali basically abandoned Malcolm X, and Malcolm X was murdered almost certainly by the Nation of Islam. But yeah, it's a funny thing, isn't it? When people die or people get very ill, there's an immediate, you just see them in an immediately different way. It's weird.
Yeah,
so,
but
circling back, I think when Macca dies, I think he'll probably get the respect that I don't know if he's still craving it now. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't, but he'll get it all, ironically, when he's not here anymore.
Yeah. I mean, oh dear me, I don't really want to go down this route. Dear me, need to talk about your show, but that makes me think of the 3-2-1 show, with Rick Rubin, where I don't know whether Paul would be irritated by it or not. I'm not sure how he feels, to be quite honest, but I'm sort of surprised and not surprised that having Rick Rubin as the person doing the talking with it, speaking with him, I thought it might have gone down the musical route a bit more and gone more into the experimentalism of Paul, but it didn't so much.
Right. And was Rick Rubin very sort of respectful and deferring, or was there immediately a dynamic where Paul's the star and Rick Rubin's sort of feeding questions? Or
yeah, I sort of get
they
that.
Kind of equals?
I sort of get that.
I would love someone to sort of do a thing with Paul McCartney where they actually confront him, not in a nasty way.
No.
Just someone who, because I think Paul did a thing with Ed O'Brien for Radiohead.
Okay, yeah.
And I just watched it a bit, and maybe it was good, but Ed O'Brien is just so. The problem is that immediately when you come with like massive deference, say, "Oh, Sir Paul, you're so wonderful," immediately you're going to get an interview. You're going to get a dynamic where Paul's always going to be the star. I would just love some very irreverent person to actually interview him. Also with Jarvis Cocker, who I always imagined was a very irreverent.
Yeah,
he hosted this thing where they were asking Paul questions. Again, just immediately deferring to him. I kind of literally switch off sometimes.
The most interesting thing, funnily enough, about that documentary to me is quite often throughout it, Rick Rubin would go into the subject of the bass playing,
right?
Which as a bass player myself, I found and a musician, I found interesting because it's almost an area of Paul that's not looked into so much. His actual bass playing, because I think from the 60s, I think is very important.
Yes.
As a bass player, but it is overlooked a lot, and I was quite happy about the fact that he brought that up. I mean, especially since Rick Rubin comes from the world of hip hop and Red Hot Chili Peppers, where I mean, let's face it, Give It Away is very inspired by Come Together, shall we say?
Oh right, yeah. I mean, I play bass as well, and I actually, when I was a teenager, my bass apprenticeship was I learned nearly every Beatles song on bass, nearly.
Yeah.
So some of them I couldn't quite, I don't know, I Want You, She's So Heavy, I couldn't quite nail. I just learned something actually on the bass. Just learned it recently. There's a really good channel where they show you the bass with the tab, and then you can play along with it. He is a fantastic bass player. Even the early stuff. Listen to the bass on Do You Want to Know a Secret?
Yes.
And Don't Bother Me as well.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Absolutely.
Brilliant. So he was great from the start,
And he put melody into bass.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, he was in what's the fellow he was influenced by, the Motown bloke? Oh, I always forget.
James Jamerson.
James Jamerson, that's it, yeah. I think I was listening to a bit of James Jamerson. You can definitely hear a bit Paul took the sort of, because a lot of bass in the early days is like dum 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 dum, and I Feel Fine, and that was quite a standard thing to just sort of play the root and the fifth, but then I think Paul, all of them, they just had this sort of very, very, this antenna, which was just very, very receptive and open. Well, beyond mic or off mic, we were saying that John Lennon's genius is being open to weird things happening.
Yeah.
So
we were off mic, but saying that, agreed. I agree with that. Yeah.
We were talking about happy accidents, weren't we?
We were talking about happy accidents, and how Blonde on Blonde from Bob Dylan had a specific sound to it that was because of the immediacy or perceived immediacy of some of the recordings on there.
Yeah, because Dylan would get them in and sometimes not even tell them the chords and just start playing and say, "Oh, come on, play along." And sometimes when that happens, when you don't generally what key the song's in, you can more or less follow along, especially if you're at Nashville. Those guys were Nashville, very, very professional musicians. They'd be like 4 a.m. and Dylan says, "Oh, I've just written this song." Sometimes when you play along and you don't quite know what you're doing, that's where these magical things can happen. Same with podcasting. I had a podcast, can't remember which one. I think it was one of the John Lennon ones. And I'd meant to prepare. And I think I was rushing. I was in Madrid and I was rushing. I'd done a class in the morning, then I'd done a recording session for my album. And I rushed home and it was about 2 minutes until I would start. And I just thought, oh, sod it. You know what you're doing with podcasting. Just go for it. And of course, there were no problems. We just had an hour or so. And it went fine. You got to trust yourself sometimes.
Yeah, but I like the fact that you, in your show, you allow yourself to go down these rabbit holes. I mean, is it? I'm assuming that you've got sort of like a vague structure of certain things that you want to touch on, but then occasionally, if your mind wanders a certain way, you'll allow that to happen to see where it leads to.
Yeah, with Life and Life Only, you mean?
Yes, with Life and Life Only, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've just been on this sort of self-development knowledge kick for 10 years. I've listened to thousands of hours of podcasts, some sort of lighter stuff, music and film and stuff, but I listen to lots of heavy stuff, psychology and stuff like that. So I've just got a ton of ideas, and yeah, I think part of it is the loss of fear, which has come a lot from self-development and things. I'm not very fearful. I wouldn't say I don't care what people think, but I'm not bothered what people think, particularly if I'm putting out a podcast in my own house.
Yeah,
it's a lot different than, because I've confronted. I say I used to work with activists, and we used to stand on Oxford Street, and we had a sign that said, "We have important questions. See me," making a joke on when the headmaster would give you a note at school that said "See me," the teacher.
That's why I giggled. I caught that one.
Yeah, that's when you're in trouble. So we had this sign. So, like I was saying earlier, like if you're outraged with something, you could just walk away from it or switch it off. So the fact that we were saying we have important questions in a jokey way with a sort of a smiley face, people would come up to us and we would ask them about the world and say, "What's your understanding of the world? Have you heard of this?" And often, when you start to bring up anything at all about 9/11 or 7/7, and and I don't think 9/11 was an orchestrated event. If I had to guess, I'd say that the intelligence services probably knew it was coming. And in fact, we know that because there was a memorandum that said bin Laden determined to strike. We've seen it, Michael Moore showed us. But so I've been confronted by people getting really angry in my face, saying, "How dare you fucking question that? Don't you have any respect for the families?" So I've had people in my face doing that. So doing a podcast and getting like a message from someone saying, "Oh, I don't like what you said," that's not really going to faze me. I used to busk in the underground on Friday nights. I used to get in King's Cross because it was one of the best pitches. You got more money. There was a thing where they were booking pitches. So you booked 2 hours at a certain pitch. and King's Cross can be quite rough. And on Friday and Saturday nights, I'd get like drunks, sort of, they're never nasty, but like sort of trying to intimidate me a bit, or singing along like right in my face and coming up next to me and doing an air guitar. And, and I used to be a manager of a William Hill, which is a betting shop.
Okay.
In Camden, again, which can be a bit of a rough area.
Absolutely.
So you'd get a lot of people they spend their whole day going from the pub to the bookie, so they get a bit pissed. That's drunk for your American listeners.
Yep.
And when they lose a bet, you get people abusing you, going, you fucking, and so I've had all that. So the idea of just putting stuff on a podcast and getting a message back, it's not really going to faze me. So really it all comes down to fear. It's what I learned, so many people are just full of fear and they don't even realize it. And so they just don't want to go anything. And I'm so exasperated. This is where, I very, very occasionally get a bit angry or a bit irritated on my podcast when I'm doing solo ones, not with guests, at basically the compliance of the public. And the fact that, as I was saying earlier, this conspiracy theory phrase is now used for anything. Like, you're not allowed to question vaccines, or you're anti-vax, and my question is, why in 2021 are there still only two positions, pro-vax and anti-vax?
Yeah.
Why is there nothing in the middle? I don't understand. And I went to a writers group here where I live, and they were nice people, but I was saying, how many people are in this group? And they said, well, there's a core of 5 or 6, and we got this weirdo anti-vaxxer who came last week. And I was thinking, for God's sake, you're a creative writer. Your whole point is that you're supposed to be open to things. I feel like I'm getting exasperated now, so I'm going to stop. But it just sort of irritates me how people essentially just allow themselves to be told what to think. And of course, the biggest problem with that is that the one thing that no one wants anyone to say to them is, you've been duped, or, you're being propagandized and you don't realize it. Because like I said, this thing in London, we would show documentaries about, it could be 9/11, but more typically things like the banking system. And when people get confronted with, do you know what cognitive dissonance means?
Yep.
Yeah, for people who don't know, it's when essentially you get information that goes against your core beliefs, or I would argue your conditioning. And people get really angry. Like, you just see it in their face, because they realize that perhaps what we're telling them is actually the truth, and that what they've been told is basically a lie, or, not necessarily on purpose. But, my parents didn't know any alternatives to what we saw in our daily newspaper. None of my school teachers knew that. So it's not to blame them, but Life and Life Only really is about, if you listen to a few of the episodes, I would challenge you to say, do you really think the mainstream media are telling you everything you need to know? Do you think a few sound bites about Afghanistan is everything you need to know? So yeah, that's it really. I can't even remember where I started with that. Yeah, lack of fear. So I would say to people, I think it's a humble thing to realize that we are sort of in a society that the media is very much based on fear. It's very slickly delivered. The BBC is incredibly slick, but if you really drill down, you will find there's a huge reality. And now we have podcasts,
Yeah.
And they're offering you that, and offering you deep dives on very, very complex topics. And you realize, what I see on the news is just like a slickly delivered 5-minute soundbite. Yeah.
That's true.
Stop there, Marv.
That's okay. But I mean,
it's the English thing. You see, I'm immediately going, oh God, don't apologize. Because I'm not apologizing. I think, again, if people are interested and they want to listen to Life and Life Only and they start to feel offended, turn it off. You're absolutely entitled to do that.
Hey, this is Greg at Bad Counsel. You want some good counsel? Keep listening to Pods Like Us with Marv, and down with monarchy.
Yeah. I can't remember who it was that somebody in the music world who said something about, if you don't like our music, don't listen to it. There's always somebody else there for you to find, Or if
That's
you don't
it.
like this song, we'll release another one in a few weeks.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Do you remember the comedian Tim Vine?
Yeah.
I love that
He's
guy.
brilliant. I love Tim Vine.
He had like the world record for telling jokes, and he's got all these one-liners like Velcro, what a rip-off. So, and it's like almost deliberately bad. And he said in an interview, it comes from insecurity. Because if I tell 1,000 jokes, if someone doesn't like the joke, there'll be another one in like 3 seconds.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love that guy. It's great.
You've reminded me of a video that I watched recently of Lee Mack.
Oh yeah.
The comedian, and so he's on stage, and there's this person at the front of the audience who's got glasses, and he says, "Oh, can I just do that or whatever?" And so he's got the glasses of this person, and he's taking the mickey because he can hardly see with these glasses on or whatever. And then he starts doing like an Eric Morecambe impression, with the raising of the glasses and everything.
Oh yeah, like waggling the glasses. Yeah.
Waggling the glasses and everything. And then there's this person at the front, another person at the front who shouts out to him, "You don't know how funny that is."
Yeah.
And then Lee Mack goes, he says, "That's the weirdest heckle I've ever had," or heckle. Yeah. I don't want to get told off for dropping my ages.
Edit that out. You can edit that.
And it's all right. It's natural.
Yeah, it's natural. Yeah, absolutely.
And then he said, to them, he says, "I don't know you don't know how funny that is." He says, "Of course I know how funny that is." He says, "I'm paid a fortune to stand up here in front of you and tell and do these things." He says, "What do you think?" He says, "Do you think I actually come out here and just tell true stories?" And I'm here going, "Why are you laughing? This is real life here. Why are you laughing at what I'm saying here? I'm giving myself out to you." And it just made me think of that. And I think I was watching I showed Louise that bit of the video, and I said, what's really good about that is that so a lot of these comics are following a script or a basic, how they go from one end of the show to the other. And I said, the brilliance there is that heckle has suddenly shown the talent therein, where he can just go off script slightly and go into something else and just naturally come out with a humorous response. Because I think it carried on and was funny for about 2 minutes, and then he brought it back again. It's almost like the old, I don't know whether this will work with the American listeners, but the famous Ronnie Corbett thing, where Ronnie Corbett would be there sat at a chair and he'd be telling the story, and he would constantly go off on tangents and come back to the story.
Just ramble. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, I think a thing I learned on this stand-up comedy course I did years ago, it's not really about gags. Yeah. It's not really about punchlines. With some comedians it is, but it's about just developing timing and being able to tell bad jokes well, because in the end, it's not the quality of the joke, it's how funny the experience is for the audience. And just to give you a Tim Vine example, he does songs like, so he goes, "I'm going to sing a song to you, ladies and gentlemen, called It's Easy." And all the song is him going, "It's easy, it's easy, easy, easy." He gets the audience to repeat, "Easy, easy, easy." It just goes on for ages. It's easy, it's easy. And then he goes, "God, blimey, that was hard work, wasn't it?" And it's not funny when I say it, but I'm just like, it's easy and then hard work.
It's a bit like...
Because he just got the timing, It's the timing, really.
Yeah, someone was... Yeah, that's that joke. They said, "What is it?" He said, "What's the best thing about the first thing you should learn about comedy?" And then there's a long pause as well. Timing.
Oh yeah, that's it.
Joke, isn't it? But
I've got very good comic timing. Yeah,
yes,
something like that.
That's the one. Yeah.
We were talking earlier about people personalizing. Like Lennon and whoever, Brando or whoever.
Yeah.
Bill Hicks had a great opening line. He'd come on stage and go, "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I've been on the road doing comedy for 10 years, so bear with me while I plaster on a fake smile and plow through this shit one more time." And then he said, "Only teasing, it's magic every single show."
But I know someone was talking to me the other day about potentially going and doing a stand-up for the first time or something. And I said to them, "Look, I don't, I've not done it myself." I would offer one suggestion or whatever. And I said, I said, if you come out with an opening joke, and I said, and you only get one, you get just one person towards the back who responds, and other than that, it's dead. I said, take note of that person at the back and actually bring that into the thing. I said, so what you will do is that person will applaud or go like that, one person at the back. And I said, what you could do is, for instance, you could use a line like, you could go, oh, thanks, I've sent the money in the post for you, or something. And then I said, so that then lightens the situation. So always be looking for those sort of times where if it starts to get a bit like that and you've got that, do something about that situation. It's making a positive out of a negative, basically, life skills.
Yeah, exactly. And like I say, making a good show out of bad material in a funny way, like purposely using, like what you're saying, like if something goes wrong or you lose your thread, turning that into the point, that's the skill, isn't it? But I mean, I read a biography of Bill Hicks. Bill Hicks spent so long. I think someone like Jimmy Carr, I'm not really a fan of, but I think he when he started, he did 300 gigs a year.
Yes.
So almost every day, or perhaps he did 2 shows a night, but you've got to spend that time on stage. I mean, some people are naturals, but because you have to just feel comfortable. Again, it's like music, it's like podcasting or anything. When you're comfortable in this space, like when I do a podcast, either on show, like a guest for your show or my own show, something happens to me as soon as I press record, and I don't really have to switch it on anymore. It just happens. You get comfortable. And with teaching, again, it's the same thing. When I first started teaching, it's horribly intimidating.
Yeah.
Being in a class of 15, 20 people. And I'm lucky because I rarely taught children, and I taught children for a year in Asia, and I just found it awful. I used to get this horrible sinking feeling just before the class. But yeah, if I can offer just some advice, what I said earlier, like I said, after you've done Shakespeare or stand-up comedy, then playing music in front of people becomes easy. So I would say almost like confront your darkest fear in a funny way. Which I know is a difficult thing to do, but think about the thing that makes you the most afraid and do it. It could be like approaching a stranger in the street, just to, if you're a shy person, some people wouldn't even approach a stranger in the street to ask them the time. But I'm planning to do an episode of Life on My Phony where I go into my local town with a recorder, like a dictaphone, and say to people, would you like to answer a few questions for a podcast?
Yeah.
And then I'm going to ask them some stuff about, what do you think about, does the media tell you what you need to know? What do you think of conspiracies? Da, 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 da. Do you think we're being propagandized on a daily basis? What's the worst that can happen? They'll say, no, I'm not interested.
That's true.
Yeah. So I think if Life and Life Phony is about anything, it's about realizing that we do live in a fear-based society to some extent. But you can conquer it by just chipping away at it every day, So I would like to sort of leave you with that message rather than the message that, depressing stuff like Afghanistan and Iraq and terrorist attacks.
I'm Agent Scott.
And I'm Cam the Provocateur.
And we're from the Spy Hards Movie Podcast.
That's right. And you are listening to Pods Like Us, the podcast that has a license to thrill.
You can go down these, go into that. I mean, your show, Life and Life Only, is interesting to me because I like to go down these rabbit holes, and essentially I like to listen to things that, in a way, are almost new to me in a sense, because with that it adds to my own, sort of knowledge, I suppose. Because before the show I was explaining to you about, or we were talking about when I took part in Gil's show, The Mind Buzz. He allowed me to go down the rabbit hole that I'd recently got interested in, because it's strange, because I listened to so many podcasts, and then I was listening to, of all things, a podcast about Genesis, tabletop Genesis, and they were talking about the Peter Gabriel song, from the album So, and it's called We Do What We're Told, brackets, Milgram's 37.
Oh, yeah, I think I know that song. That was used on a documentary, that song, yeah.
Yep. And then one of the people that actually does that show, Mike Lord, he actually majored in psychology in university, and he started to go into detail on what Peter Gabriel was speaking about in that song, which, I mean, I always thought for all these years, I just thought of that song as an interesting vignette of a piece as opposed to a fully formed song. But because he explained where that came from and the story behind it, it suddenly made the song more interesting to myself. And I went down the rabbit hole of trying to find out more about what that was all about. And it was interesting. And then Gil, as soon as he started the Mind Buzz, he said, "Oh, what was that you were talking to me about?" And he allowed me to go down that. And then Gil's a brilliant one for, so we're there. And then while I'm chatting about it, I can see him on another computer. So he's got dual screens where he is, pulling away the curtain. So he was talking on one monitor, while on the other one, he was bringing up all this stuff. And suddenly it's sort of like, when there was a pause, he suddenly started playing this footage that he'd actually found of the from those initial experiments in the 60s. And
the Milgram one's fascinating.
Absolutely. So
yeah,
for anybody, I've already gone through this now before in a previous episode, but for anybody interested, so the idea of Stanley Milgram was that he was I think he was a lecturer at Yale, and he was interested in, because the year before he came up with this, they had, I think they'd sentenced, was it Heinrich or somebody? I can't remember his name now. But they were going
One of the Nazis.
One of the Nazis. And
maybe Himmler, Heinrich Himmler, maybe?
Yes, that's the chap. Yep, Heinrich Himmler. Yeah. And so he had kept close watch of these trials of these German soldiers and leaders, and the fact that they were basically answering and just saying, look, these things that we did them because we were being ordered to do them, and it was our job to do them. And so Milgram thought of doing these experiments where he would see it, he would find out if that was the truth. If people were told to do things, would they just do them despite the outcome? So he came up with this idea where he put initially, the first time that he went through it, he put these advertisements in the newspaper to advertise for people or volunteers to take part. Well, actually, they weren't volunteers; they were paid $4.50, I think it was, at the time. So they were brought in by this newspaper advertisement, and they were taken to do. So the idea was that you would have what was called a learner and a teacher. So you'd have one person behind the glass in one room, and in the other room, you had somebody who was attached to an electric chair with electrodes on, and they had these series of words where you'd have associated words. You'd have one word, and you'd ask the learner for the associative word, and if they got the word wrong, you were to electrocute the learner. The teacher would electrocute the learner. And you had a dial at the back that sort of like explained different levels. And each time that they got one wrong, it would go up a level as to how the electric shock was. And at the back of them, they had somebody called a supervisor who would basically watch and make sure that, things were done, or just oversee what was happening. And so these things were happening. And then the twist of it all is it's almost like an M. Night Shyamalan experiment, with his films. There's a twist to it where, so initially the twist is that the actual person in the electric chair wasn't being electrocuted; they were acting, but it was made out to the teachers that they were also part of the people, some of the people who were brought in from the newspaper advertisement, and then they drew sort of like it's sort of supposedly random as to who was chosen to be the teacher and the learner, where really it was set up so that the people who come from the newspapers advertisements would be the teachers, and the learner was actually an actor pretending. And the actual experiment was to find out how far those people, normal, ordinary people on the streets, would go with the instructions they were given to electrocute these people until they would stop doing it. And would they just keep going on? And I just found that fascinating. And they ended up, I think Stanley Milgram said that he proved that actually if you're ordered to do things, it's very possible that you would go against your natural urge to, your morals would go out of the window because of orders.
Absolutely, yeah. I think it was a certain percentage would go up to the point where they would actually kill the person.
37 out of 40, I think it was.
Was it? Wow. I mean, you've really hit on something there, because another thing I wanted to say really about media, it's actually well known, this is a fact, that the CIA infiltrated the media, which sounds like some bizarre, again, like a conspiracy theory, but it's Operation Mockingbird is a real thing.
Yeah.
And essentially advertising does the same, because everyone, if you talk to people, they will all say, oh, advertising doesn't work on me. And I'm like, well, I'm sorry. There's a reason why advertising is $1 million or even $1 billion business. It does work on you, but you just don't know it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So again, a kind of another mantra of Life and Life Only is perhaps that there are forces out there that actually know you better than you know yourself, including me, not saying I'm anything different, because they know, they do experiments, they know what triggers to pull. And you see this on social media, there's absolutely no doubt that there are lots of dummy accounts on social media. And I did an experiment, actually. This is not the most fun way to spend about an hour, but I looked through the YouTube comments, and when there's a video that's sort of inflammatory, I look through the accounts of people saying, "Oh, you're a lunatic, you're talking a load of rubbish," and loads of them are fake accounts that have either nothing on them or just like one video.
Yeah.
And another thing, if you don't mind me, there's another really interesting video online, and I'm a little bit wary because it's not like a sourced video. It could be slightly staged, but have you ever seen the one that's in a dentist waiting room? And there's about 20 people waiting, and 19 of them are actors, and there's only one person in there, it's a young lady who's genuine. And every 10 seconds, a buzzer goes off, and everyone stands up. All the actors stand up.
Okay.
And the woman, the first time it happens, is like, oh, what's going on here? But then eventually, after about the third time, she starts standing up, like for no reason whatsoever. You just hear beep or a buzzer or a beep, and everyone stands up and sits down again.
That's the hive mentality.
Yeah, and what happens is, but what's really fascinating, gradually, like all the actors, they go into the dentist. It's a dentist waiting room, and they go in to see the dentist, so to speak.
Yep.
And then what happens is that genuine people start coming in, but this girl has started standing up every time she hears a buzzer, and all the other people who are not actors, they all just come in and they all start doing the same thing. And you think, like, are these people like lunatics or something? But they're not. It's what you said. It's compliance, which has been, it goes all through school. Again, the question is how much of it is planned and how much of it is just like the way society is organized. It's absolutely fascinating. And another thing, you have a show called P2. I don't know if you actually know. Do you know where that comes from? Obviously, it's a George Harrison song. That actually comes from Propaganda Due,
okay,
which is an Italian secret society that Berlusconi was involved in. And I always found that fascinating, because how would George Harrison know about propaganda due? Due is obviously Italian for two. So that'd be worth looking into. It's like, oh, did George Harrison know something? Because you find, like, I'm a big fan of Frank Zappa, and he did a song called "I Am the Slime."
Yes.
So if you ever come across that, and you kind of think, oh, it's just a kind of a goofy song, and then you see the video, and "I Am the Slime" is all about television, and it's all about how television is just filling you full of crap, basically. Not to say that there aren't entertaining shows, but it's more to do with the news. It's filling you with all this useless information. And again, Bill Hicks used to talk about that. Hey, honey, we've got 50 channels of crap on the TV. Pink Floyd as well. That song, "Nobody Home" from The Wall. I've got however many channels of to choose from.
Yes. Yeah. You can swear. You've said the F word a few times.
Yeah, I have. Yeah. So I don't know what the rules are here.
I'll put a big E at the end. It's fine.
I want to get beeped. I've always wanted to get beeped.
Oh, right. Oh. I should have taken note of where you've sworn so I can do that.
It's my secret ambition.
Damn. I'll remember next time and take notes so I can beep you.
This is Dave of Live Life Loud, the Decibelic podcast, and you're listening to
Pods Like Us with Marv.
Can you put me in touch? Can I ask you a favor? Can you put me in touch with some of these sort of people who are into alternative ideas? I know you put me in touch with Gil.
Yep.
But if there's anyone else, can you put me in touch with them? Because I do like having these conversations.
Absolutely. I mean, you're on Twitter, so you can look for Out of the Blank, because I know Robbie likes to just talk about absolutely anything, and he likes to go off on tangents, and he loves this sort of thing. So there's Out of the Blank. Yeah.
Yeah. But, I think the only problem I've got at the moment is that I'm recording and getting all these wonderful opportunities to record and talk to people. But then I'm going to end up with a huge backlog again.
Yeah.
Do you mind if I use this audio just in the future, like in about a month's time?
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't mind doing that. Done that before, We did a group chat with me, Gil, and Dave Belknap from Decibelic Live Life Loud podcast. And Dave, and I think Gil did the same as well. We used the exact same footage for each other's shows. And I just found that really fascinating to see how each person used that footage in a slightly different way. And it's just...
Well, they call it a swapcast, don't they?
Yeah, they call it a swapcast, yeah. And I'm always doing swapcast for this.
Yeah.
This is a swapcast, essentially, isn't it, really?
Yeah, what I generally do is I wait a few weeks because I don't want to compete with your version. So what I'll do is when you put your version out, I'll promote it on all my channels as I would my own podcast. And then I'll wait about a month. And then I'll probably edit it slightly just because I've got used to a certain way of editing, taking out ers and ums and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to change the essential content.
I think this will be October the 7th.
Oh, is it? Oh, okay. Yeah. I mean, I've got so much at the moment and no time to edit it. So yeah, it could be up to December before it. But yeah, it's nice because then, like I say, I can promote your version of it. And then a month will go by and people will have been not forgotten about it, but obviously you'll have more episodes going out.
Yeah.
And then I'll do a version of it. And then it's like, to some people who haven't heard the original one, it'll be a new thing. So it works well. We've all got to support each other, haven't we?
Absolutely. Definitely. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what shows of yours stand out then?
All of them.
All of them.
Yeah. Only kidding. No.
Listen to the whole lot of them.
Of course, yeah. I'm just having a look here. So on the more sort of inner truth side, this more inspirational side, you might say, the meditation one I did, because I did a couple of meditation retreats when I was in Thailand, which were absolutely incredible experiences. And the emotional intelligence, I did a 3-parter on the Daniel Goleman book. I think one that's very important was this one I talked about, conspiracy theory, a powerful phrase, which is like a 1.5 hour deep dive on the phrase itself, rather than, I don't look at Princess Diana or the moon landings. I'm not even especially interested in that. It's the weaponization of the phrase, because it's about shutting down debate. So, you just use that phrase and then immediately X amount of people will just switch off.
Yeah.
If you want a bit of comedy, like I said earlier, the one about table tennis, which is a 20-minute, and I kind of put on a bit more of a comedic, a lighter, different voice for that one. That's quite an amusing story, because this poor guy, he just had this absolute nightmare, and I feel bad exploiting it, but it was 30 years ago. Black Mirror fans would like the nosedive one, which again is coming suspiciously true. You may well find in the next few years that there's a social credit system in the West. And obviously, a pattern that will often come is that people will say, oh, that would never happen in the West, stuff that's happening in China. But you might find bit by bit, using the boiling frog technique of just gradually introducing something. And then the interviews there, the Doug Valentine one was a big standout. So there's only been 18 shows up to now, but there'll be many more.
Absolutely. The table tennis one, coming back to that, I like the sound of that, because it's a bit like one of the reasons why I love satire is because that will bring out serious issues, but in a different format. So it's not like a news program. Satire isn't. It's done in a humor. That's why I like the famous ones would be the. I still think that the class system one, the famous one where you've got the three people standing side by side, the upper class, the middle class, and the working class. And I still think that is a perfect representation of why satire works and what good satire is. Because it's something that satire looks at a situation from all angles, or good satire does. It doesn't accept this opinion or that opinion. It's a more open format, which is what your program is. That's more of an open format where you will deep dive into it and look in more detail at all sides and what the basic nuts and bolts of it is.
Yeah, I think one of the tricks with that is to give people something that they can enjoy on different levels.
Yeah.
And if you take, a brilliant example is The Simpsons. Kids can watch that and just get off on the comedy of it, and adults can watch it for the social commentary.
Absolutely.
So you can enjoy it. That's why it's such I think The Simpsons is I've never actually been the hugest fan, weirdly enough. I'm not one of those super fans, but I can see that at its best, it's doing something very, very clever. Bill Hicks would say, I mention Bill Hicks a lot because Bill Hicks and George Carlin are my absolute comedy heroes.
Yep.
Bill Hicks would say, when he'd been saying something very profound, he'd say, don't worry, everyone, there's dick jokes coming. Just bear with me for 5 more minutes and then we'll all pull our parachutes and float down into dick joke heaven. So, yeah, that one you're talking about is the Frost Report, isn't it? It's John Cleese and the two Ronnies.
Yeah.
So, yeah, what I did with the table tennis story, it's frivolous in one respect. It's kind of a humor, comedy story. But then I kind of go into, like I said, nerves. It tells you a little bit about the English character, a sort of not wanting to laugh too much, but sort of sniggering under your... Because if I could just tell a very quick story, I was talking about, in that table tennis story, I branch off. I used to work in a company and retail company. And there was a guy, like a head honcho, who came from Switzerland. He was a weird guy because he was very powerful. He was very high up in the company, but he looked almost like a little boy. He was very, very youthful looking and had a kind of very unintimidating way. Anyway, he did this slide presentation and his English was fantastic, but as a non-native speaker, sometimes, you get mistranslations, and it was so funny. At the end of his thing, he said, Right, everybody, I want to give you my philosophy of business. And you know, business people always want to talk about being open and everything. My door is always open, all that kind of crap.
Yeah.
He said, so he pulled down this slide and it said, in order to succeed, we must expose ourselves. And I put in the table tennis story, like immediately everyone had the image of boiled sweets and inappropriate behavior. You know, the idea of someone with a trench coat exposing themselves. So there's a sort of humor in that, but then, you know, that's a little bit of a comment on, you know, the mentality, you know, like we're adults, but sometimes we become children, you know, when someone says something like that, we sort of go, hee, you know, that kind of thing.
It's like still laughing in adulthood at fart jokes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. But I think I said somewhere in the story, it's something like, people didn't know to behave. It was almost like someone's doing a presentation and you realize their flies are open. It's that kind of thing. You know, it's that slight uneasiness that comes across the room. But
hey, it's Gil from the Mind Podcast. Today's mind culture and social podcast. And you're listening to Pods Like Us.
One thing I always found fascinating is sort of group dynamics, and you'll know from being in a band or being in a classroom teaching, dynamics are a fascinating thing, you know. And like I say, when I do my meetup group, I've started my own one here where I live. When you get onto certain topics, you feel a sort of slight unease comes over everybody. You know, if you go too far down the rabbit hole, as you were saying earlier.
Yeah.
So it's just all fascinating. Psychology is just inordinately fascinating, and you don't really need to study it to have an interest in it, you know, because it's everywhere. You know, just watch the way people behave, you know, study behavior, and you can do that for free just by interacting with people.
I almost purposely, I think I call it the unease. I'm going to call it from now on the unease factor, where if I will suddenly feel a little uneasy, I might think, do you know what? I'm going to go into that on purpose now, because there must be something behind it that's making me uneasy, and it's almost the danger of the danger of the unknown that makes it more interesting, in a sense.
Exactly. Yeah, it's why. I mean, I used to box a little bit more, sort of just went to a boxing club, did some sparring and stuff. When people go to boxing matches, there's a weird thing that happens where this sort of bloodlust that sort of comes out that's in all of us, you know, because in the end, we're still animals, you know, we're civilized. Well, we think we are.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's that thing of sort of living through another experience. So you go to a boxing match and you might find that some aggressive impulse comes out and you don't act it out. You don't actually start punching people, but you live through it. So I think, yeah, you're absolutely right. When you get that feeling, just try and embrace it. When you start to feel uncomfortable, like, because a boxer will tell you that their whole life is dealing with discomfort. That's why you don't generally get many middle class or upper class boxers who get to the top, because boxing is essentially mostly working class people who come from ghettos. Yeah. Who've lived out that discomfort in their whole life. So it's nothing difficult for them. Well, obviously boxing is a difficult thing. It must be a terribly scary thing, whoever you are. You know, even Mike Tyson used to say, you know, if you don't feel fear when you go in a boxing ring, you're crazy. But it's a wonderful thing to confront your fear and almost start to enjoy it. You know, which sounds very weird, but if you just, with a little bit of sort of training yourself, you know, you get an adrenaline rush.
Yeah.
You know, and you get an adrenaline rush from pleasurable things, but you also get an adrenaline rush from extreme fear. You know, it's like if you went in the forest and you spotted a bear, like in the distance. You know, that would be a horrible feeling, but it would also be an exciting feeling.
Yeah.
So I think you're absolutely right. You know, takeaway might be just put yourself in a fearful situation. You know, not a terrible situation, but a little bit of fear. You know, go up and confront someone in a friendly way where normally you'd be afraid to. And it's wonderfully transformative. You know, You know, I've had over the last 10, 15 years, just profound changes in my life, pretty much off my own back. You know, I was inspired by certain people, but I can't tell you how much I've changed, you know, over the last 10 or 15 years.
Yeah.
And anyone can do it, you know, it really can, you know. Anyone can change. It's not beyond you. You know, a lot of it's your own limitations. A lot of it's another theme of the podcast is sort of self-talk. You know, most people, I think, including myself, we have what they call an inner critic. We have that person in your head that could be your father, could be your teacher, or it could just be nobody. It could just be yourself telling you, oh, you know, what are you doing? Yeah, you can't do that. What are you doing starting a podcast? It's that annoying, cynical voice, but you can crush it. You know, there's an old fable where people in a village lived in fear of a sort of a mythical monster, and they saw the huge shadow of it. And as you get closer and closer to it, the shadow recedes and then gradually disappears. And it's a wonderful metaphor for, you know, the fear we feel. If you just confront it, you actually find there's almost nothing to it. You know, it's sort of an invisible voice, or like I say, it could be your parents or your teacher. But yeah, it's a wonderful thing to confront it and conquer it.
So, hey, this is Tim from Bad Counsel. You want some good counsel? Keep listening to the smooth, dulcet tones of Marv on Pods Like Us.
Right, you just made me think of a Star Trek episode.
We've just done 2 hours 20. This is fantastic.
I know, flipping out.
I could do another 2 hours, so you're going to have to rein me in at some point.
I am. We're going to have to bring this to an end shortly.
Could have some lunch.
Yeah, it's me and you both. So you've already explained your approach to editing. So what other shows would you suggest to people that you really enjoy listening to at this moment?
Oof. I mean, there's so many. More to do with life and life only, more to do with self-development.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Psychology, there's a great one called Psychology in Seattle. And I actually had both the guys, I had them on Glass Onion to talk about John Lennon's psychology. That is brilliant because it's deep, but it's very accessible at the same time.
Yeah.
The guy, I mean, he's done 1,000 shows.
Wow.
In fact, when he came on Glass Onion, he'd already done 1,000 shows. So he's probably done 1,100 by now. There's a good one called Tangentially Speaking.
Yes, I've heard of that one, yeah.
A guy called Chris Ryan, and he's written a book which I'd really like to read called Civilized to Death, which is not as morbid as it sounds, but it's talking about how modern civilization has kind of brought us, it's almost like 2 steps forward, 1 step or 2 steps back. Technology is great on one level, but we're losing, I think everybody knows this, we're losing that sort of communal feeling of the past. Families are getting split up, that kind of thing. But it's not a depressing show by any means.
No.
If you really want to go a bit more hardcore conspiracy, but very, very well sourced, the Corbett Report, Corbett, it's James Corbett, again, who's been on Life and Life Only. Very, very reasonable guy. Pretty much everything he says is well sourced, and he believes in open source information.
Yep.
Oh my God, there's so many. It's hard. The Mind Renewed, which is a friend of mine. I've been on that one a few times. For music, the one I mentioned earlier, my favorite album with Jeremy Dillon. That's actually the name of the show. Oh my God, can I have a quick look?
Okay. Yep.
I mean, it's just millions, but I'll try and just pick a couple. I've actually got a list of all the ones I listen to. Hang on a sec. I mean, Beatles ones, I'm sure they've all been covered on the show. Glass Onion on John Lennon, that's really good. I'd love to meet that guy one day. No, just kidding. Let's have a look. I really like The Unexplained with Howard Hughes.
Yes.
Not that Howard Hughes, but he's a guy. Again, I like him because he's been a mainstream radio DJ for years. So he's kind of, he's found a happy medium where he will embrace alternative ideas, but he will challenge you You challenge the person. Sorry, just a couple more.
Okay.
Yeah, if you're
I promised you a poem, didn't I? I was going to give you a poem.
Oh, yeah.
Yep, go on.
If you're interested in advertising, there's a good one called The Dark Arts of Marketing.
Yes.
Which again is not as dark as it sounds, but it's sort of telling you advertising techniques from a guy who actually uses them in his daily life. For songwriting, you've probably heard of Soda Jerker. I'm sure you've
Absolutely, yeah.
Soda Jerker on songwriting, that's a good one.
Yeah. With Brian Sy.
Yeah, they're from Liverpool, aren't they, those guys?
Yeah, they went to Lipper, didn't they, I think?
Lipper, yeah, absolutely, yeah. Million film ones. I mean, the Projection Booth podcast is good. Next Reel is one I listen to. Again, I'm going to plug a couple I've been on, but only because they're my friends, not because I've been on them. But Real Britannia, RWL, is about English movies, British movies.
Great.
The Stinking Pause, Pause. The guy who runs those, Scott, he likes his puns, as do I.
Obviously.
And then just literally two more. History by Hollywood is a very good one because it's reviews of films which are based on real events. And what they do is they actually go scene by scene. So they'll talk about a scene. For example, let's take The Social Network. Yeah, that one about Facebook. And they'll actually go scene by scene and tell you how true to reality, but not done in a dry way. It's entertaining. And then final one is called Napalm in the Morning. There's actually two called Napalm in the Morning, so you have to get the right one. And it's the Vietnam War through film. So they take all the classic films like Full Metal Jacket and Apocalypse Now, and again, they'll tell you how realistic it is. And I think a couple of them are actually, I don't think they're Vietnam vets, but they're actually been in the military, so they know what they're talking about.
Well, that is a quote from Apocalypse Now, the title.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I love the smell of napalm in the morning.
Yep.
Absolutely.
The great Robert Duvall.
Robert Duvall, yeah. There's 100 others, but I'll leave it there.
Okay. I'll give you that poem because it sort of it fits with because you were on about a book. Oh, you were on about a book, weren't you? When you mentioned a book in passing when you were talking about the pods. Somebody wrote a book, something death. I can't remember.
Oh, Civilized to Death. Yeah.
Yep. So, mind you, I've said that, and I don't think this works for that. Anyway, so basically, I'm saying a poem, or I'm going to mention a poem because I love poetry, I love words, and Antony is a lover of poetry and words, and has taught English as well, I believe.
Still am.
Yep, still teaching English. So this is The City of Sleep by Rudyard Kipling, who is one of my favourite authors. Over the edge of the purple down, where the single lamplight gleams, know ye the road to the merciful town that is hard by the sea of dreams, where the poor may lay their wrongs away, and the sick may forget to weep. But we pity us, oh pity us, we wakeful are pity us. We must go back with policeman day, back from the city of sleep. Weary they turn from the scroll and crown, fetter and prayer and plough. They that go up to the merciful town, for her gates are closing now. It is their right in the baths of night, body and soul to steep. But we pity us, our pity us, we wakeful, oh pity us. We must go back with policeman day, back from the city of sleep. Over the edge of the purple down, ere the tender dreams begin, look we may look at the merciful town, but we may not enter in. Outcast hall, from her guarded wall, back to our watch we creep. We pity us, our pity us, we wakeful, our pity us. We that go back with policeman day, back from the city of sleep. There you go.
Oh, that's lovely, yeah. I was saying earlier, I could feel like how much you like that in the way you read it.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, there's a lovely rhythm to that, to the writing as well, isn't there?
Absolutely. Well, I've always found that even with his novels, his writing of books, there's a rhythm to his writing in that as well that I really like. Yeah.
What's the famous quote with Kipling about treating two imposters? Can I just Google it?
Please, yeah.
No, there's a brilliant quote which has always stayed with me.
I mean, I was thinking, because this coming up, I knew about, the love of poetry and of literature, and I thought I've got to do something, because it's something that I don't not able normally to go into. And so I was thinking of poetry, and I thought, so I've got lots of poetry books. Because at the side of me as well, I've got Spike Milligan's book of Milliganimals.
Oh yeah, great.
And then of course I've got quite a bit of T.S. Eliot as well, because I love the Practical Cats. And but yeah, so there's so many to choose from, that I could have chosen from.
I'm going to swear again, I'm afraid, but Larkin wrote a poem about your parents, they fuck you up. Do you know that one? And I've been dealing with family drama recently, so it kind of stuck with me. You know, the Kipling, I mean, I won't read the whole poem, but I think the famous bit is always, if you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you. If you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too. If you can wait and not be tired by waiting or being lied about, don't deal in lies, or being hated, don't give way to hating, and yet don't look too good nor talk too wise. And then just the famous line is, if you could meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two imposters just the same.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. The line, I think with poetry, same with really good song lyrics, I don't think there has to be one meaning. You can take whatever you want from it. And there's interesting, that line, don't look too good nor talk too wise. I often think about that when I'm podcasting, because when you're trying to dispense some sort of truth that you've learned, one of the natural reactions of people would say is to feel like they're being patronized.
Yeah.
It's like a reflex action. So, and I've had this before, like, again, what I was saying earlier, when I used to be doing these events in Oxford Street, when you confront somebody with something that they kind of suspect might be true, but it goes against their conditioning, they will get angry. And one of the things they'll say is, oh yeah, you know everything, don't you? That's one of those reflex. It's basically an ego reaction.
Okay, yeah.
Because I think, if social media has proved anything, it's proved that inside every adult, there's still a child. Again, including myself. I'm not saying I'm any different. I've been triggered on social media. I've got into arguments, and I look back and I think, Jesus Christ, you're 40 years old, and you even just engaged in an argument that would shame, a 10-year-old.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting thing as well. We won't go on a tangent now, but ego is another thing that, if your listeners want to take anything away from that, study ego, study your own ego, and see how much it basically guides your actions and how you need to guard against it. Because the ego is essentially, the id is the child, but I think an ego is sort of makes you behave in a childish way. So, there's so much to mine, but you've got to be if you are interested in developing, and you've got to be very honest with yourself, and it's very painful as well. It's painful to think, it's painful to analyze your own behavior, but you don't need to necessarily go into therapy or and have a professional. You can almost do your own sort of self-coaching or self-therapy in a way. So again, one of my big mantras is that, especially with the internet, people say, oh, the internet, like everything on the internet is a load of rubbish, but you can get so much. You've got like a whole university course there waiting for you. You have to pick and choose a little bit, but there's so much opportunity now to learn that there's really no excuse in my book, for not, at least questioning what you've been told and stuff.
Yeah, the information's out there. You don't know how easy you've got it nowadays with the internet.
Hey, this is Brian with Concerts That Made Us podcast, and you're listening to Pods Like Us, a great show about other great shows.
Yeah. Well, again, one of the things that people will say about conspiracy theories, they'll say, again, I'm using the term in the sense of this sort of weaponization of it. They'll say, "Oh, I bet you read that on the internet." Or they'll talk about people on the internet. Who do you know that doesn't use the internet, apart from your granny and children under the age of 5? Although they probably do, to be honest. So when they say like stuff on the internet, that doesn't really mean anything. I think what they mean is that a lot of stuff on the internet is not necessarily sourced. I get that, but in terms of just learning and self-development, I mean, there's so much there. It's all there waiting for you. If you're so inclined. Anyway, that's the last speech I'm making today.
That's all right. I don't need to ask you advice now because you've just given it.
Well, in terms of the podcasting.
Well, well, in life in general, I think that works for podcasting as well. What you've just said.
Yeah, I mean, with the podcasting, the sort of mechanics of it. I think last time I was on, I was saying, try and find a nice middle ground between organic, but sort of not. I don't know, it's just me as a podcast listener. Like I say, I'm not that into stuff that just goes for hours and hours and is not edited at all, and it's just like a bunch of people just making a load of in-jokes.
Yeah,
that's not to my taste. It might be to other people's tastes, but I try and find a middle ground between, like I say, smooth, slightly smooth. I take out the ers and ums, for example, and if there's too much repetition, I edit that out. But then I try and I don't think it sounds too slick, because another thing is, if you watch the news, just watch a news program and really analyze it. It's just slick beyond belief, It's hello and welcome to the news, and they even talk in that funny voice. Hello, welcome to the news, and they'll say something like, "America has pulled out of Afghanistan," and they'll show footage of, you probably saw that footage of those Afghanis falling from that American military plane that was coming out of Kabul. But if you go back to this is not really nice to watch, but if you ever watch Walter Cronkite announcing that JFK had died.
Yeah.
Do you remember that clip? Like, he puts down his glasses and he looks like he's about to burst into tears. That would have no place in today's newsroom. They're not interested in anybody getting emotional. Everything has got to be slickly delivered. This is the news. 100 people have died in a suicide attack in Iraq. It's just this horrible desensitization. So I think with podcasting, again, especially if you're talking about something that you feel is important, personalize. Tell stories about yourself. You're doing it for you. I'm doing it a lot for myself, but I'm sure you sound like you've got lots of good stories. I've got hundreds of stories from my own life, and so try not to self-indulge too much. But people love it when they personalize. Like when someone, as we were saying earlier, when you get to know a podcast and you listen to a few episodes and you get to start to like the person and start to feel like you have a kinship with them, then when they start talking about their own life, I love it. I think, oh, brilliant. Like the Psychology in Seattle guy, Kirk.
Yep.
He's very professional. He's a professional therapist, but then he talks about his own vulnerabilities, and he talks about, times when he's been afraid. And I love that. I really warm to people. I don't really want something that's too slick. If I listen to a podcast and I like the person, I want to hear them talking about, their own fear or their own vulnerabilities. Of course, it depends on the topic. If you're doing a review of an album, there's probably not a place for that. But I think there's a place for deep analysis.
Unless you're reviewing the first John Lennon album.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, it's built in then, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I did an episode on that with Dave Thermay. I've got a Beatles podcast.
Yeah. Have you?
Yeah, Dave's been on twice, actually. It was called John Lennon in 1970. I was doing a series where I take a year and we talk about the news events, which tend to be always dominated by Vietnam, as you can imagine, from that 60s, 70s period.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Dave and I were talking about Plastic Ono, and we both agreed afterwards that the album was getting better the more we talked about it. Because it's very I get very emotional. I've never burst into tears during a podcast, but sometimes some things really touch me very deeply, and I'm that kind of person. Perhaps it's because I'm half Italian, I don't know. And that Plastic Ono band, it hits me very hard, because I didn't have the struggles of John Lennon. I grew up in a fairly stable family, but I'd argue scratch beneath the surface of any family. Anyway, but I really identify with those struggles, so I let myself get slightly emotional and personalized, because I don't do it, just because I think the audience is going to like it. I just, I turn the mic on and I just go into this other space, basically, as we are right now.
Yeah.
And I can't help myself. I don't engineer it. It just happens. So, yeah. Don't even remember what I was talking about. But.
It's okay. It's like if I pick up a guitar sometimes and I'll just naturally go somewhere on the guitar and it's innate.
Yeah. And break the rules as well. Talking about Nirvana, there's which I think it's "Serve the Servants" from In Utero.
Okay.
I'm sure it's that song. He goes into the solo. The solo is more or less in a completely different key. Like it shouldn't work at all. But In Utero is all about basically mental illness, isn't it? I think In Utero is almost Kurt's Plastic Ono band in a way.
Yeah.
Although it's much more, it's much less direct. Some of it is anyway. But yeah, Kurt Cobain was an amazing guitarist, because obviously technically he wasn't amazing, but he would play stuff that just sounded like what is he doing? Like, it's not even in tune. Sorry, not in tune, but it's not even in the right key.
No.
But it just fits. Like, I think that, like I was saying earlier, I think Nirvana just totally holds up. I think if you compare it to, say, Pearl Jam, I like Pearl Jam.
Yeah.
But that just doesn't hit me in the gut. I mean, Chris Cornell, Soundgarden, that hit me in the gut.
Yeah. But then he broke some rules with guitar chords that he'd use.
Absolutely. I mean, dissonance. What dissonance is, when you put notes together that don't fit. When I was making albums, my producer would occasionally say, "Yeah, but that note doesn't fit with that chord." He is very open to experimenting. Don't get me wrong, but I would say, "Yeah, but I kind of like it. It sounds wrong, but I kind of like it, because it must connect with me in some way." We don't always know why, do we, as creative people?
It's some of the reason why I like the music of Eno.
Yeah, Brian.
As well,
Eno.
because Brian Eno will put in a lot of dissonance or things that shouldn't work in the music, but it does, because it gives it that extra. I think that sort of thing works mainly with music that is of an emotional, has an emotion to it, because then that emotion is brought out by that dissonance and the what shouldn't work, but actually it does work because it gives it that something.
I think also maybe it's something to do with imperfection, because, like I say, with the news, I struggle with modern music.
Yeah.
Modern rock music particularly. There's very little. I'm going to sound like such an old man, but there's very little since the White Stripes that has really interested me. I've tried.
Yeah.
But the thing is, I think nowadays we have so much music. Like when I was in Spain, someone downloaded 30 gigabytes of music to my hard drive. And I'm like, I will never in the rest of my life be able to wade through all that and listen to it properly. So I've already got more music than I can ever listen to in my entire life.
Yes.
But I don't really like the modern rock sound. I think the White Stripes, he did something very clever. It sounds like modern music and old music almost at the same time. Do you know what I mean? And Jack White was a kind of in the Kurt Cobain school, where he's not really a great guitarist, but it just sounds very powerful. Do you know what I mean? Jack White's a bit sloppy. I mean, Jimmy Page from Led Zeppelin, if you were really dissecting that, you'd say he's a really sloppy guitarist, but who cares?
Yeah.
Because it's just brilliant.
It is.
Can't remember what we were talking about. Yeah, but what were we talking about?
It's okay. We'll go back onto track notes now.
Yeah,
okay. So where can people find your show and get hold of you?
Right. Yes. Yeah, I have a third podcast called Film Gold, which I won't talk about now, but it's basically a deep dive into films.
Wait for season 6 for that episode.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I think you and I could talk about films for probably the rest of our life. But
absolutely.
Anyway, Film Gold. Yeah, Glass Onion on John Lennon is the one that your listeners probably already know about, and then Life and Life Only. So they're available in all the usual places, but I think I'll give you the Twitter because I'm finding Twitter is quite a good place. So Glass Onion is Onion Lennon with a capital O and a capital L. Life and Life Only is Life Only 75, and Film Gold is Film Gold 75, capital F, capital G. But I also have a website finally, which is Antony with no H, Rotunno, ROTUNNO.com. And that has got my blog, all my music, which is 5 albums and hundreds of demos and covers and live videos. And then all the links to all my podcasts. So basically everything is there finally in one website.
That's cool.
Yeah, and that's it. And thank you very much. It's been great. I mean, we've done
it has, and we've talked for nearly 3 hours.
Yeah, and I feel no joking, I feel as high as a kite. When I get in these conversations, it's like my new drug.
Yeah,
barely drink anymore.
It's a legal one, so we're fine.
Yeah, I barely drink anymore. I've cut out the naughty stuff that I used to do. Although again, I had some great experiences, don't get me wrong. So, we all need a drug, don't we? And
we do.
Great conversations is a great drug. So yeah, just thank you very much. And thank you for letting me talk. And
it's fine. It's great.
Not shutting me off.
It's great catching up.
Yeah.
It's been a year. I've been doing this for a year. Crikey.
How many episodes have you done now?
63 that are out.
Wow.
I know. Wow.
So can I chuck a question back at you?
Go on.
What's been the journey of your podcast? Like, how has it changed you? Has the podcast changed? What have you found?
I found it's easier to do it now. So it's like you said, you put on the headphones, you have the microphone there, and you're automatically in that place, which initially I wasn't. But I've also found that I'm more. I used to be a bit protective of things, so I'd be. So I did initially used to overproduce, I think. Whereas now I'll listen to, if I listen to some of the older episodes now, the first ones that went out, I'll listen and think, oh, I can see where I've edited that there, because the conversation, it's almost like you're trying to overproduce to make it slicker, but you lose some of the conversation in the process. And now when I'm editing, I might hear something that doesn't quite work, but I'll think, I'm not going to get rid of that because it's natural. So I'm less like that now for production. So yeah,
I think everyone will tell you the same thing. When you first start, there's a certain insecurity, and I think overproduction. I mean, John Lennon, Double Fantasy. Hello. I think, when Ken Womack was on Glass Onion, or when I read his book, sorry, that was an incredibly detailed production, Double Fantasy, and he gave the songwriter, he gave the musicians charts. And I kind of disagreed with Ken Womack a bit. Ken Womack was saying, oh yeah, the charts were really helpful. And I'm like, well, isn't Beautiful Boy just basically 3 chords?
Yeah.
I don't really understand why you need charts. But anyway, John Lennon was very much that, I think overproduction is a sign of insecurity, and we've all been there. So I'm pleased that you're finding that you're doing that less. It's great. Not that there's anything necessarily wrong with it, but
it's okay.
And has it changed you as a person? What have you learned? That's not too general a question.
I think I've lost a shyness that I would normally have. I think it's made me more open to talking to people, I think.
Yeah.
I don't really know where else to go with that. But perhaps I need some lunch.
Yeah. Yeah. Good idea.
Dear me.
Anyway, yeah, just thanks for having me on again. This has been fantastic. I don't think we knew we were going to go this long, but
no, I certainly didn't. But I just let it go. I like the conversation of it all and just letting the conversation flow. And now I've got to think about how I'm going to edit this down to something that people will be happy to listen to.
Well, just to warn you, when I put it out in a month or so, it'll probably be 2 months at this rate because I've got such a backlog. I'll probably leave most of it in, so it'll probably end up being a 2-parter. So
I might actually end up doing that as well. Actually,
yeah,
2-part, I think.
I'll just say if you happen to edit some of it out, you'll probably be able to hear it again when I put my version out. So,
okay. Hold on a sec while I do the sign out. Okay. So thank you for chatting today, Anthony.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for listening. You can get hold of me or the show, get in touch with the show. We now have our own email account, which is podslikeus@gmail.com. And you can also go to the website, themarvzone.org, for anything to do with me if you really want to go down that rabbit hole. But for now, thank you very much for listening, and hope you listen again to another episode of Pods Like Us.